Chapter 75. Following the footprints, they carefully moved forward and soon found something. Lan Zao, it's you? You're still alive. What happened to you? When Song Su saw Lan Zao, he almost couldn't believe his eyes. In his impression, Lan Zao was a strong and steady middle-aged man. He had a strong will and was always vigilant. But now Lan Zao had lost a lot of weight. His hair was unkempt and his face was covered in blood. He was like a puppet, sitting blankly in the lush grass, completely defenseless. When he heard someone call his name, he slowly turned his head sideways. His face was dazed and sluggish. Zidi's heart sank. She secretly guessed, could it be that he was attacked by some magical beast, causing his soul to be damaged and turning him into a retard? The moment they found Lan Zao, everyone was happy. They didn't know that Lan Zao and Huang Zao had secretly retreated and left him in the lurch. In the eyes of Zhenjin and the others, Lan Zao had been separated from them in the sandstorm. Being able to meet up with Lan Zao at the oasis was naturally a pleasant surprise. But this joy was like a gust of wind. It quickly dissipated along with Lan Zao's mental state and was replaced by uncertainty. Lan Zao, is there anyone else besides you? Where's your brother Huang Zao? Zhenjin asked. Hearing the name Huang Zao, Lan Zao suddenly trembled, like a magic statue that had been activated by a password. He was stunned. Soon after, the expression on his face changed dramatically, as if he had suddenly recovered all his memories. He was extremely anxious, flustered, and nervous as he shouted, "My lord, Lord Zhenjin, you've come. Quickly save my brother, quickly save him." As he spoke, he threw himself at Zhenjin's feet and hugged Zhenjin's calf. When he saw ZD again, it was as if he had seen her for the first time. He shouted in surprise, "Miss ZD, it's great that you're here too. With you around, you'll definitely be able to cure my brother." "What happened?" "Calm down, Lan Zao." Zhenjin frowned. He leaned over and grabbed Lan Zao's shoulder, lifting him up. "Quick, come here." Lan Zao suddenly broke free from Zhenjin's grasp, turned around, and ran towards the nearest coconut tree. After running a few steps, he tripped on the grass and fell to his knees. He was extremely anxious. He used both his hands and feet to crawl and run, leading the way in front. The situation is very strange, but they can't get anything out of it. Zhenjin and others raise their spirits and follow the blue-green algae. When they reached the coconut tree, Zhenjin, who was walking in front, narrowed his eyes. He saw Huang Zao in the grass. Huang Zao's clothes were very tattered. Most of his flesh was gone. His pale ribs, arm bones, and leg bones were exposed. He lay motionless on the ground. The remaining half of his body had already started to rot and began to emit a foul stench. Huang Zao was already dead. Now he was a complete corpse. But the strange thing was that the corpse was still bandaged. The bandages were obviously long strips of cloth made from torn clothes, and they were also covered with many huge coconut tree leaves. Brother, quickly open your eyes. Look, Lord Zhenjin is here. Miss ZD is also here. You're saved. You're really lucky. You fell into the desert, but you still managed to meet the two lords." "Huh?" Lan Zao knelt beside Huang Zao. He used his arm to support the back of Huang Zao's head so that the latter's upper body could be straightened. It had to be said that this was a horrifying scene. Huang Zao was already dead. His face was pale and his body was broken. The bloodstains and white bones were a shocking sight. Song Su and ZD, who came later, saw this scene and suddenly stopped in their tracks. Ugh! ZD was caught off guard and immediately retched. She almost vomited out the acid in her stomach. Huang Zao. Song Su's eyes widened behind the broken lenses. "He's dead. When did he die? How'd he die?" Lan Zao was shocked. He shook his head frantically and refuted. "No, he's fine. He's not dead. He's still alive. Song Su, you're old and blind. Look carefully again." Then, Lan Zao looked at his brother and suddenly lowered his voice. "Brother, quickly wake up. Open your eyes and look." Huang Zao was already deader than dead. How could he open his eyes? Lan Zao stared at Huang Zao's face closely. When he saw that the latter had no reaction, he gradually became anxious. Brother, brother, open your eyes and look. Quickly open your eyes and look. Lan Zhao began to go crazy. He stretched out his right hand and pushed open Huang Zhao's eyelids, revealing the white of his eyes. Look, look. He opened his eyes. My brother opened his eyes. Cyanobacteria shouted happily. ZD and Junjin were silent. Song Su shook his head and sighed deeply. Lan Zhao, wake up. Your brother is indeed dead. No, he's not dead. He's not dead. You're lying. You're lying. Cyanobacteria roared and became hysterical. He placed his ear on Huang Zhao's right chest. Half of it was flesh and the other half was bone. His heart had already disappeared. Listen, he still has a heartbeat. Lan Zhao's face was suddenly filled with joy. Everyone was silent. Lan Zhao looked at everyone's expressions and became extremely anxious. He stretched out his finger and placed it under Huang Zhao's nose. Look, he's still breathing. Lan Zhao shouted. Everyone was still silent. Lan Zhao shouted at everyone. He's still alive. His shout was very loud. This was Lan Zhao's shout with all his might. It shook everyone's eardrums. Everyone stood in place, motionless like 3 Iron Men. He's still alive. Lan Zhao half knelt on the ground, his arm wrapped around Huang Zhao's corpse. He opened his eyes wide and shouted at everyone again. But his shout was only half of his previous volume. Cyanobacteria's eyes were bloodshot. Tears streamed down her face, leaving 2 streaks of tears. He's still alive, he's still alive, Lan Zhao shouted in a low voice. He seemed to be proving this point to everyone, but also seemed to be calling out to Huang Zhao. The strong man's upright upper body bent down. He slowly lowered his head and buried his head deep into Huang Zhao's broken chest. The sun had already sunk below the horizon. The last ray of light was gone. Everything was in darkness. Lan Zhao's cries drifted in the oasis. He wept and told, It's me, it's me. It's me who killed him. It's me. It's me. With these days. I'm alive, but he's dead. I'm the murderer. I'm the murderer. I'm sorry, little brother. I'm sorry, mother. I didn't take good care of him. I deserve to die. I really deserve to die. Oh, it was hard to imagine that a strong man could cry so miserably. Her cries were like ghosts floating on the surface of a calm lake. The starry night sky was still bright. The temperature in the oasis was much more normal than the outside world. It was not as cold as the desert at night. There was also a bonfire. The orange-red flames burned quietly, occasionally emitting the crackling sound of wood cracking. Every time there was a sound, there would be a small spark of flame that quickly dissipated in the air. There was a wooden rack above the bonfire. Lizard meat skewers were being cooked. There were several coconuts beside Jinjin and the others. There were many coconut trees in the oasis. There were 2 types of coconut trees. One type produced coconut fruits, and the other produced date palms. Using a knife to cut open the coconut shell, there was fresh and delicious coconut juice, but it had a clear smell of sulfur. The problem of water was solved in a better way. It was much better than expected. Junjin and the others now not only had lake water, but also fruit juice. Of course, because it was late at night, the situation by the lake could not be ascertained. To be on the safe side, Junjin and the others did not rush to fetch water. Not far away, Lan Zhao was half kneeling in the grass. His eyes were dull, only staring at Huang Zhao's corpse. He did not respond to the barbecued meat's fragrance or the calls of Jinjin and the others. He was like a puppet. Apart from being able to breathe, he seemed to be dead. He was lying next to the bonfire. His eyes were closed, and he was unconscious. He still had a fever, and his temperature was getting higher and higher. It was obvious that his condition was worsening. Perhaps when the next day came, these 2 people would become corpses. The firelight reflected on the faces of Junjin, ZD, and Song Su. ZD glanced in the direction of Lan Zhao, and then her eyes moved to Jinjin. The girl took the initiative to break the long silence. Sir, this kind of person cannot be left alive. There are many marks on Huang Zhao's corpse. How can we leave him alive? I also found that Lan Zhao's back seems to have been sprayed with acid. The wound is rotten, but it is obvious that it has been treated and bandaged before. This is obviously done by Huang Zhao, but Lan Zhao could not have done this with the wound on his back. Huang Zhao helped his brother and carefully bandaged Lan Zhao's wound. Zhen Jin did not respond. His eyes were still fixed on the bonfire in front of him. Song Su spoke at this time. I have a question. Since Lan Zhao has already arrived at the oasis, there is plenty of food, and he has weapons on him. Even if he can't hunt wild beasts, there are still coconut fruits on the ground. ZD immediately replied, It's obvious that he just rushed here. Lan Zhao was able to last until here. Perhaps it is because he came to the oasis that Lan Zhao fell into endless regret and pain. Because he understands. Song Su nodded. Sir Zidi's guess is very reasonable. Therefore, Sir Zidi also believes that Lan Zhao fell into this state because of regret and pain. In other words, Lan Zhao is suffering from the torture of his kindness, morality, and familial love. Is that so? Zidi immediately frowned. She slightly glared at Song Su. What do you mean? Are you trying to absolve a person who killed his own brother? Song Su shook his head repeatedly. Sir Zidi, you misunderstood me. I don't want to absolve anyone. No matter what kind of person Lan Zhao is, he still killed his own brother. He is a murderer. At this point, Song Su looked at Zhen Jin again. I just want to clarify some of the shallow and perhaps narrow truths that I know. Zhen Jin's interest was piqued. He said expressionlessly, Scholar Song Su, please speak without reserve. Song Su smiled slightly and threw a piece of firewood into the bonfire. We humans are actually very weak. Compared to wild beasts, we don't have sharp claws, hard shells, wings to fly, or gills to breathe in water. Moreover, the intelligence that we are so proud of is actually not exclusive to us. Elves, beastmen, demons, angels, goblins, and so on all have intelligence that is not inferior to ours, or even superior to ours. In today's world, we humans are the strongest in terms of overall strength. But if we look back at history, we will find that our ancestors were always at a disadvantage, struggling to survive in the midst of danger. The prosperity of the human race and its rise to the top was only a change in the last few hundred years. So, a long time ago, when our ancestors ate raw meat, drank blood, and lived in nature without clothes, our ancestors discovered an important point. As individuals, we are too weak. Only by helping each other and borrowing each other's strength can we have a higher chance of survival. Gradually, the earliest human tribes were born, followed by families, and then the embryonic form of country. Now, we humans have built a powerful empire that rules the entire human continent. And in this process, we developed ethics and morality. We worship the strong because we can survive by relying on the strong. We recognize the nobility brought by bloodlines because excellent bloodlines are more likely to be able to cultivate the strong. We have the concept of community, sacrifice, and honor. We despise selfishness, we advocate sharing, and we don't want to be ostracized by the collective. This is because individuals are too weak. Being recognized by others in the collective is more beneficial to the individual's survival. However, in reality, selfishness is the first instinct of life. The emergence of ethics and morality came after selfishness. Fundamentally, ethics and morality are also due to the selfishness of life. Just like sharing, the essence is to exchange conditions that are more beneficial to one's survival. Just like how we despise selfishness because we don't want others to be selfish. This is not beneficial to our own survival. We help others because helping others allows us to survive better in the group. Surviving alone will reduce our survival and reproduction rate. It will make it more difficult for our bloodline to be passed down, regardless of whether it is high or low. Enough, ZD shouted in a low voice. She stared at Song Su, her gaze penetrating the bonfire between them with anger. Scholar Song Su, are you trying to say that it is because of the instinct to survive? You are not only exculpating Lan Zhao, you are also exculpating yourself. Song Su did not stop because of ZD's interruption. At this moment, he showed a rare toughness. His gaze was focused on Zhen Jin's face. Yes, The strong male lion chases away the old lion and becomes the new leader of the pride. It will do its best to guard its territory and show off its strength. It would let the lionesses go out to hunt for food for it, and it would kill all the cubs of the old lion. They will not have the morals of respecting the old and loving the young. These words are harsh to the ears, my lord. Song Su sighed bitterly. His gaze was sincere and sorrowful. But this is... Chapter 76. Don't come over, don't come over. ZD fled in panic. Jinjin chased after the girl. So hungry, I'm so hungry. Jinjin had completely transformed into a silver spear scorpion. He had been defeated by hunger, and his mind was filled with thoughts of eating. ZD was finally forced to the bottom of the cave, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. Jinjin pounced on her, his huge calicary and sharp scorpion tail fiercely moving. Poochie! ZD was dismembered in an instant. Blood splattered, dyeing the bottom of the cave red, and also dyeing Jin's vision red. The next moment, Jin suddenly opened his eyes. He saw the dark night sky. He gasped for breath, cold air filling his chest and lungs. His pupils gradually expanded to normal size, and his mood gradually calmed down. A nightmare. He had a nightmare. In this nightmare, he became a spear scorpion and attacked ZD, treating the girl as food to satisfy his hunger. Jin quietly sat up. He broke out in a cold sweat. Looking around, ZD was sleeping soundly beside him, while Baiya and Lan Zhao were lying not far away. After hearing Tsang Su's words, Jin knocked Lan Zhao unconscious and put him down. As for Tsang Su, he was responsible for keeping watch for the second half of the night. The bonfire was still burning quietly. The flame was half of what it was before, but it still provided a steady stream of warmth. The light of the fire shone on Jin's face. The young knight's expression was uncertain. Why would I have such a nightmare? Is it because I've always been worried and afraid of the magic crystal in my heart? This was a very normal psychological reaction. Imagine a normal person suddenly growing horns, or a tail, or lumps all over their body. How could they not be worried and afraid? No one would have a magic core, but Jin had managed to grow one. Moreover, this demon core was extremely mysterious, strange, and powerful. It could turn Jin into a monster and absorb the bloodline of living beings. I can't use my Chi. If I encounter danger, I can only use it. Sigh, it's best if I don't use it in the future. Who knows what serious consequences there will be? Jin subconsciously touched his chest. He was afraid that if he misused the magic core, he would one day turn into a monster and never regain his human form. Jin felt that this magic crystal had already begun to tempt him, tempting him to slaughter the common people and sacrifice the innocent in order to obtain greater power and authority. On the other hand, I'm also afraid that I'll become Lan Zhao. Jin glanced at Lan Zhao in the distance. To be honest, he could empathize with Lan Zhao, and this kind of understanding was very profound, because Jin had once faced the same choice as Lan Zhao. Hunger could drive people crazy. Hunger could turn Jin into a spear scorpion to steal gold stones. It could make ZD feel that cooled lava was like burnt chocolate bread. It could make Tsang Su want to grab a handful of sand and eat it. It could make them not let go of anything that could be eaten. It could make them feel that jumping rat meat and lizard meat were the most delicious. In addition to understanding, Jin also felt fear and lingering fear. If I had chosen to treat Baiya as food, would I have ended up like Lan Zhao? Although Baiya is not my biological brother, I will always be tortured and interrogated by the kindness, morality, and honor of a knight. I will be like Lan Zhao, living a life worse than death. Jin's heart was very heavy, because he naturally thought, in the future, will I become such a person? When he returned to the volcano cave and carried Baiya on his back, the young knight told himself, I have not fallen. However, he was very clear, he had many thoughts. Those thoughts were selfish, evil, shameless, and despicable. They made Jin almost unable to face himself afterwards. In addition to understanding, fear, and heaviness, Jean also felt a sense of pity for Lan Zhao. In order to survive, he became a beast. He killed his own brother. After that, he came to this oasis. This kind of arrangement was simply a joke and a mockery of fate. Lan Zhao regretted it. Perhaps if he had discovered the oasis earlier, perhaps if he had held on a little longer, Huang Zhao would not have died. Extreme regret made him unable to believe that Huang Zhao had died. He desperately denied the fact that he had killed his own brother. Even if his vision was normal, he still believed that Huang Zhao was still alive and that there was still hope to save him. He lied to himself. He did his best to lie to himself. He fell into his own fantasy. Only in this way could he escape the condemnation of his conscience and the torment of his morals. This oasis is real, but he has fallen into his own mirage. However, everything is just a fantasy in the end. Our appearance and attitude burst the bubble of his fantasy. The ruthless reality and the truth were placed in front of Lan Zhao again. And this time, he could no longer avoid it. He could no longer lie to himself. Just like what Song Su said before, people who survive in the desert will collapse because of a mirage. Lan Zhao is the same, and the situation is even worse. Frankly speaking, if Jean did not experience life and death, he would also despise, loathe, and hate the current Lan Zhao. It was very likely that he would have taken Zidi's advice. However, after experiencing so much, the young knight's body and mind had undergone tremendous changes. He is our companion. I once said that I would do my best to save everyone, so I will help him. This was the decision Jean made by the campfire when he was faced with the two completely different suggestions from Song Su and Zidi. Then, he got up and put half a bowl of coconut water and barbecued meat in front of Lan Zhao. Lan Zhao did not react at all. He was still staring blankly at Huang Zhao's corpse. In the end, Jean could only knock Lan Zhao unconscious. Why did he make such a decision to help Lan Zhao? Jean also felt that it was strange at the time, but now he understood a little. Maybe it's because of a desire in my heart. I hope that if one day I fall into Lan Zhao's situation, there will be outsiders who can help me. However, Jean knew very well that he could not really help Lan Zhao. Lan Zhao's problem did not lie on the outside, but on the inside. Jean even doubted and asked himself whether he should help a person like Lan Zhao. Human society had ethics and morals, so the ethics and morals of the Knights Templar must be above the standards of the public. Lan Zhao's behavior was undoubtedly anti-moral and anti-ethical. Am I right to help a person like Lan Zhao? Am I helping him because I see myself in him? Am I making excuses for my possible depravity? At this moment, looking at the swaying flame, Jean felt that he was hesitating and wavering. He had gained initial control of the magic crystal in his heart and became very powerful. He had enough food and water, so he was able to get rid of this crisis. But the young knight felt that he was weak. He asked himself in his heart, "What kind of person am I? I am afraid of death. Can I continue to uphold the spirit of a knight? Can I shoulder the responsibility of my family? Am I a selfish person? If I were in Lan Zhao's situation, what would I choose? If I choose not to eat, then I will lose my life and will not be able to reach the oasis. If I choose to eat, then I will live a life worse than death. Which choice is the right one?" Jean faced himself bravely. He did not use the magic crystal as an excuse to avoid his true self. Jean could not answer his own question. Every time he thought, every time he faced these questions, every time his soul was tortured, he lost a part of his strong self-confidence, and then another part. Jean was very clear. When he saved Baya, he told himself that he was not depraved. This was actually just a subconscious denial. Who did not want to be brave? Who did not want to be honorable? Who did not want to be upright, without any moral shortcomings? However, Song Su's words are not without reason. Jean was really thinking. This kind of thinking forced him to face the ugliness and darkness in the deepest part of his human nature. This was undoubtedly very painful. Losing confidence in himself, Jean fell into deep self-doubt at the same time. Beside the bonfire in the middle of the night, the young knight quietly got up and half knelt on the ground. He lowered his head, covered his heart with his hand, faced the direction of the Shengming continent, and began to repent. God, Shengming Emperor, my great lord. Under your gaze, the world is bright, and the shadows flee in panic. Now, your believer, your knight repents to you, because I have fallen into the mire of my soul. Please shine your light on me, and let my corruption, ugliness, filth, and filth fade away. I beseech you to forgive me for the sins of my thoughts. The long confession ended. The gentle night wind blew in the young knight's ears. Everything was within Jin's expectations. God did not respond. The young knight sighed in disappointment. ZD was sleeping soundly. Bai was lying flat on the grass, and Lan Zhao was curled up on the ground like a shrimp. Both of them were frowning, and their expressions were painful. They were both struggling. Time passed, and the night gradually faded. The sun rose, casting a scorching light. Just like the countless days and nights before, nature still operated in an unchanging pattern. Any feelings of distress, sadness, pain, confusion, and so on seemed pretentious in this vast nature. The world was big, but living was the most important. Before wealth, power, beauty, and honor, there must be food and water. No matter how painful, how confused, how sad, life still had to go on. Chapter 77. The next day, Jin prioritized exploring the entire oasis. The environment in the oasis was unexpectedly peaceful and quiet. The footprints by the lake were basically spear scorpions and acid lizards. This made it easy to speculate that there were only 2 large groups of spear scorpions and lizards near the oasis. The lake water could not be explored, so they did not know what was hidden in the lake. However, according to the traces left by the beasts by the lake, there did not seem to be any signs of fighting. This might mean that there was no threat hidden in the lake. There were many small creatures. For example, small lizards, normal scorpions, spiders, and jerboas. Occasionally, a bird would land on a certain coconut tree in the sky. After everyone discussed, Jin began to cut down these thick coconut trees. After plucking all the coconuts, he still had to process the tree trunks, chop them into dry wood, and use the tree core to make the body of the short bough. ZD, on the other hand, was concocting potions. Compared to the barren desert, the oasis contained much more resources. Sang Su was in charge of making the hemp rope. Until now, there were only 5 people left in the exploration team. 2 of them could not even walk on their own. Among the remaining 3, Sang Su was old, and ZD was only a 15-year-old girl. Therefore, the labor force was reduced sharply. Fortunately, there were not many exploration team members, and there were not many things needed. After a morning, Jin had already made 5 short bows. ZD finished the preliminary grinding process and began to test the medicinal properties of the various materials. In the afternoon, Jin went to the lake to dig deep and obtained a lot of soil. Using the soil and fire, Sang Su began to make clay pots. In the evening, Jin stopped cutting down the coconut trees. Instead, he climbed to the top of the coconut trees to pick the coconuts. The coconut shell was very hard. Even if it fell to the ground, as long as it did not hit a rock, it would be intact. Jin also picked a lot of palm leaves. Like the coconuts, whether it was the palm leaves or the coconut tree itself, they all emitted a strange smell of sulfur. With ZD's potion, the first clay pot was made. During dinner, a pot of hot water was successfully boiled out of the clay pot on the fire. Drinking hot water and eating barbecued meat, Jin and the others felt a strong sense of happiness. This is the ultimate enjoyment in the world, ZD exclaimed from the bottom of her heart. Morning of the 3rd day. Whoosh! A wooden arrow flew out, and a bird on the crown of the coconut tree was frightened and flew away. Jin sighed under the tree. Although the first short bough has been completed, I'm not good at adjusting the bow, and the arrow's accuracy is terrible. Zhenjin stretched his left shoulder a little. The injury from before had mostly recovered, and it would no longer affect his archery. Looking at the bird flying away, Zhenjin took out a wooden dart and threw it out based on his intuition. The moment he threw it, Zhenjin activated his heart core and turned his arm into a bear's arm. Then, almost instantly, the mutation was canceled. The speed of the dart was astonishing. Like a bolt of lightning, it swiftly and accurately hit the flying bird and fell to the ground with it. Zhenjin walked over and picked up the bird's body. The wooden dart was deeply embedded in the bird's chest. Only the tail of the dart was left in the bird's body, and it almost flew out. Bird meat was no longer precious, and there was still a lot of lizard meat. But bird feathers were very important. They were the source of material for arrow feathers. Bird bones were also useful. Last night, Zhenjin told himself not to use the heart core as much as possible. But without bird feathers, there was no way to make qualified arrows. In addition, the number of birds in the oasis was very low, and it was completely incomparable to the forest and rainforest. So, Zhenjin could not easily let go of any bird. Carrying the bird, Zhenjin returned to the original place and found a brand new basket made of rattan. The basket was filled with mud from the lake. Breakfast had already been eaten, and Zhenjin's original goal was to dig up the mud and transport it back in a basket. When he saw a bird on the way back, the young knight did not let it go and killed it directly. Carrying the bird in one hand and the basket in the other, Zhenjin returned to the temporary camp. ZD was setting up a tent in the camp. This kind of tent was very simple. The framework was a stable triangular structure built with a few slender wooden strips, and then the surface was covered with palm leaves. Then, the palm leaves and the wooden strips were tied together with rattan or hemp rope. The wide palm leaves were stacked on top of each other, and the ground of the tent was covered with fluffy hay, successfully creating a warm and windproof private resting place. It was estimated that 5 such small tents would be built. Zhenjin, Song-Su, and the others would each have one. ZD had already built one and was building the second one. At this rate, no one would be sleeping in the open tonight. There's an unexpected gain. Zhenjin handed the bird to ZD. ZD looked up and smiled at Zhenjin. Just put on the ground. Here, this is the medicine I made. It has almost no smell, but it can repel mosquitoes and poisonous ants. Zhenjin took the medicine and checked the situation of Baiye and Lan Zhao. The two of them were lying motionless on the grass, not far from each other. Zhenjin bent down and touched Baiye's forehead. He found that his fever had subsided, and his breathing was steadier than before. This was a good sign. Zhenjin was slightly happy. Baiye was better at adjusting the bow than he was, but he could not count on him for now. I hope he wakes up soon. Zhenjin silently wished in his heart. If Baiye woke up, he would need to be fed water, and he would be able to eat on his own. He would eat more than now, and his intake of nutrients would be more beneficial for his recovery. As for Lan Zhao, he had already woken up. He was curled up on the ground, still motionless. His expression was dull, and his eyes were numb, like a lifelike puppet. He was a bronze-ranked Doqi cultivator, and his body was much stronger than Baiye's. But his mental state was not good, and he had no interest in the food placed in front of him. Zhenjin sighed softly. The young knight was not good at persuasion and comfort, and more importantly, his feelings towards Lan Zhao, who killed his own brother to survive, were very complicated. Even Zhenjin felt a faint fear towards the act of persuading Lan Zhao. Was this a form of forgiveness and connivance towards his own darkness? If he continued to connive, would there be no bottom line? Would he allow the core to corrode his heart? Would the noble knight of the temple cease to exist and be replaced by a dark and depraved evil follower? Zhenjin carried the basket of soil and walked out of the temporary camp, arriving at a nearby open space. This place was originally a grassland, with lush grass that was taller than a person's knee, but now the grass was all burned. A fire pit had been dug out in the open space, and Song-Su was using moist soil to cover the fire pit. The building he had built was already in its embryonic form, like a towering cylinder surrounding the fire pit. This is the earthen kiln. The firewood is burned underground, and this is the grate. It is divided into 2 layers, and the firewood is burned in the lower layer. This kind of structure allows air to flow in faster and makes the fire burn brighter. Sang-soo explained. The height of the earthen kiln did not reach Zhen Jin's knee, but even the complete kiln was not half of Zhen Jin's height. Zhen Jin looked down and immediately saw the bottom of the kiln, which was separated by a great bridge. The great bridge was a round mud brick, about 30 centimeters in diameter, and its thickness could not be seen clearly. The mud brick great bridge had clearly been dried, and there were small round holes evenly distributed on it. Zhen Jin could imagine. Once the kiln started operating, the dry firewood below would burn, and the flames would rise from these small round holes to the great bridge. Although the kiln was small and crude, once it was built, it would be far more stable than a bonfire, and the temperature of the flames would be higher, and its practical value would be greater. With this kiln, we can make bricks and tiles, and in the beginning, we can build a wooden house with tiles. When the kiln expands, or even more, we can use the mud to make bricks, and then we can build a brick house. Sang-soo continued to explain. Zhen Jin could not help but praise. Scholar Sang-soo, is there anything you don't know? Sang-soo smiled and shook his head. There is too much I don't know. Actually, I only learned this knowledge in recent years. I have long wanted to go to the wasteland continent, and I wanted to perfect my book. I studied a lot of information about the beasts, and this is actually their way of life. The beasts are much more backward than us humans, and most of them are still in the tribal era. In a vast wasteland continent, there are very few beastly city-states. Then, is this mud enough? Zhen Jin pointed at the basket full of mud. Sang-soo calculated for a moment. It is more than enough to build the kiln, but I'm afraid it is not enough to make clay pots. I will have to trouble you, Lord Zhen Jin, to make another trip. Sang-soo naturally did not plan to make any bricks or tiles. After going through 2 teleportations, everyone knew that as long as the teleportation formation was there, the houses and camps built on this island would not have any practical value. The reason why they were making clay pots was because they needed containers to store water. Zhen Jin, Sang-soo, and ZD each had a water bag. However, the amount of water they had was far from enough to fill these water bags with water. They needed more water, and the more water they had, the safer it would be. The oasis was only a place to rest, and they still had to set out on their journey through the desert. They had a lot of water stored, and even if they did not have a new source of water, they would be able to last for a long time. This would allow them to resist greater risks. Zhen Jin poured all the mud on the lakeside and left the clearing with the empty basket. He did not immediately go to the lakeside, but instead sprinkled a circle of medicine around the camp. He did not find any threats. For now, the oasis was still safe. However, it was better for Zhen Jin to do something like going out. Whether it was ZD or Sang-soo, it would be very difficult for them to defend against a sudden attack. When Zhen Jin returned to the camp, ZD was already building the 3rd tent. The progress was so fast because this kind of private tent was too small. A few wooden sticks were used to build the frame, and then layers of natural palm leaves were draped over it. When people entered the tent, they could only lie down flat and only cover their heads and feet. It was very difficult to even turn over on the spot. This kind of natural tent was like a small green coffin made of shoddy materials, and the space was very cramped. Seeing that it was Zhen Jin who had returned, ZD was immediately relieved and began to work again. She half-knelt on the ground, and her upper body went into the tent as if she was adjusting the palm leaves inside. Her lower body was left outside, and her small brown leather boots were no longer covered by the magic robe. Because of her posture, the magic robe clung to her buttocks, outlining a moving curve. Seeing this scene, Zhen Jin could not help but feel a little moved. Chapter 78. When he came to the open space again, Zhen Jin found that Sang-soo had already started to light the fire. The flames were burning at the bottom of the kiln. The kiln had been built and was being tempered by the flames. The water inside would evaporate, and because of the heat, the soil would undergo a certain degree of qualitative change, becoming dry and harder, and becoming more stable. Sang-Soo looked at Jun-Jin. After the fire, if the kiln doesn't crack, then it's a success, and we can rely on it to make pottery. If it dries and cracks, then we'll have to make it again. But the possibility of that is not high, Sang-Soo said as he began to make pottery. He first cleaned up the mud, taking away the grass, leaves, small stones, earthworms, and so on. Then he constantly kneaded and patted the mud ball to make the texture of the mud ball more uniform. Then he separated a part of the mud ball and used his palm and fingers to pinch a plate. The edge of the plate rose vertically. Then Sang-Soo separated a small part of the mud ball and rolled this part of the mud ball on the stone slab, forming a long mud strip of roughly uniform thickness. Sang-Soo put the cylindrical mud strip on the vertical edge of the chassis and gently squeezed with his fingers. Finally, the mud strip and the chassis were tightly integrated as one. After that, Sang-Soo kept repeating the process. One by one, the mud strips were built on top of the chassis, and the height of the chassis was constantly changing, finally forming a shrunken pottery jar. The pottery jar was the size of an adult's head, pitch black, and looked very ugly. Sang-Soo carefully lifted the pottery jar and placed it on another stone slab. Jun-Jin carefully noticed that whether it was the stone slab used for work or the stone slab on which the pottery jar was placed, Sang-Soo had spread a layer of charcoal ash in advance. This was to prevent the bottom of the pottery jar from sticking to the stone slab. Sang-Soo worked with the mud. His old hands and thin fingers looked very agile. His clothes and white fluffy beard were stained with mud, but the worn-out lenses were still spotless. Jun-Jin did not stay to help Sang-Soo. He had a more important task. That was to patrol the oasis again. Jun-Jin had done a thorough investigation on the second day he arrived at the oasis. But that didn't mean that oasis wasn't dangerous. Wild beasts were allowed to move freely, and Jun-Jin's patrol area was limited. He could only try his best to avoid a single patrol route. Maybe if I mutated into a spear scorpion, I would be able to see further and hear more. However, this idea was rejected by the young knight as soon as it appeared in Jun-Jin's mind. He was very cautious about the core. He had made up his mind that he would not use this mysterious magic core unless it was absolutely necessary. Jun-Jin patrolled carefully and confirmed the safety of the oasis. Of course, Jun-Jin had no way to investigate the lake in the oasis. The lake water was cool and azure in color. When there was no wind, the lake water was as calm as a mirror, like a sapphire wrapped in the yellow desert, contrasting nicely with the blue sky. After lunch, they continued to work. The production of the clay pots had encountered a setback. Most of the clay pots had cracked after being fired in the kiln. It should be a lack of clinker. Sang-Soo knew the reason, but there was nothing he could do. ZD couldn't provide any help in this regard. Fortunately, crushing the cracked clay pots into slag and merging the slag into the mud would increase the success rate of making new clay pots. Jun-Jin began to regret it. If he had known this would happen, he would have brought back all the water bags from the volcanic cave. Almost every member of the exploration team had a water bag, but when Jun-Jin left, he only picked up some weapons and took away the empty water bags. It was unrealistic to go back now. On one hand, it would consume food, time, and physical energy to go back and forth. On the other hand, the risk would greatly increase. Don't forget that the place was erupting. Whether it was bringing ZD and Sang-Soo back or leaving them here, it was not a good choice. If bamboo grew here, it would be much more convenient. Jun-Jin thought of the bamboo forest that he had discovered and used when he was hunting yellow algae. The bamboo joint was a natural container, and it was quite convenient to store water. However, the shell of the coconut was also good. However, the coconut milk was rich in nutrients, so Jun-Jin and the others chose to keep it. They tried their best to drink boiling water. Towards evening, Jun-Jin returned to the camp again. ZD had already set up the 5 tents and was concocting potions. She told Jun-Jin the good news. Baya had woken up. Jun-Jin came to Baya's tent. Baya was still very weak. He was lying in the tent with his head exposed. Seeing Zhenjin arrive, he wanted to get up, but he failed after several attempts. Don't move, just lie down. Zhenjin could see that Baiyu was still very weak, so he quickly stopped him and sat down beside him. Lord Zhenjin, you have saved my life again. You are my savior, and I will repay your kindness even if I have to sacrifice my life. Baiyu said emotionally. Take care of your injuries, eat more, and drink more. It was not easy for me to save you. Zhenjin said with a smile. Baiyu's eyes were red, and hot tears fell. He choked and said, Lord Zhenjin, I know that you carried me all the way. You are a noble knight of the temple, but you risked your life for a lowly person like me. You also gave me precious water to drink. Lady Zd and Scholar Song Su have told me all this. Helping the weak and saving the good is the creed of the temple knights. Zhenjin smiled and put his hand on by his shoulder to stop him from trying to get up again. Although I do not ask for anything in return, I can understand and accept your desire to repay me. You have to live well and recover as soon as possible. Today I was having a headache about the matter of adjusting the bow. I remember that you are an expert in this area, so I was waiting for you to help me. Sir, I can now. Baiyu heard this and became even more anxious. He wanted to get up again, but Zhenjin gently pressed him to the ground, and he could not move at all. Don't worry, listen to my orders. Zhenjin's face was serious. Baiyu immediately stopped struggling and looked at Zhenjin with eyes full of worship and respect. Sir, I will listen to you. Just as he was about to get up, Zhenjin suddenly remembered something. He took out a few letters from his bosom. Oh, right. I will return these letters to you. We have read the contents of the letters. Originally, I thought that if you died, I would give these letters to Miss Sybil. But now that you are alive, I will return them to their rightful owner. Sir, Baiyu suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Zhenjin smiled and patted Baiu's shoulder. You have to work hard, live on, stand out, and don't disappoint the girl you love. When you are in a difficult situation and cannot persevere, think more. Imagine one day, you become a knight, returning home with glory and marrying Miss Sybil. Yes. Baiyu nodded and choked up again. His eyes were red and filled with tears again. At this moment, his entire person was radiating light, filled with hope for the future. Zhenjin was actually more inclined towards Song Su's opinion regarding Sybil's matter. But Zhenjin thought about it and did not remind Baiyu. Firstly, he did not know the truth. Secondly, the current Baiyu needed a positive encouragement, not a blow. Baiyu was full of optimism, as if his entire person was bathed in the bright sunshine. Lan Zhao was also lying in a small tent made of palm leaves, exuding a gloomy and deathly stillness. He was on a hunger strike. Ever since Zhenjin and the others exposed the mirage in his heart, Lan Zhao could no longer face reality. He did not eat at all, nor did he drink a mouthful of water. Over the past few days, he had either been sleeping or curled up in a ball, crying silently. The contrast and change between the two made Zhenjin's head shake, and he sighed. Human nature is a very subtle and strange thing. When Baiyu was alive, he was willing to risk his life to save Song Su. He did not want to die, not at all. When Lan Zhao was about to die, he was willing to sacrifice his own brother. But now, he does not want to live anymore, and only wants to die. Zhenjin could not persuade Lan Zhao. He could not open his mouth, and he did not know how to persuade him. As long as he looked at Lan Zhao, he could tell how strong this person's will to die was. It seemed that the longer it stayed in this world, the longer it breathed, the more it was torturing the blue-green algae. This kind of torture made Zhenjin feel pity for Lan Zhao, and at the same time, it gave him a sense of pleasure that justice had been served. After all, seeing a wicked person get punished was something that made people clap their hands in joy. If a person really wanted to die, what could outsiders do? Night fell. A busy day had passed. The monotonous lizard meat and tasteless boiled water for dinner were praised by everyone. Beside the bonfire, everyone who was eating had a sincere and moved feeling from the bottom of their hearts. To be able to sit peacefully on the ground and eat until one's stomach was full, what a blissful thing this was. And to be able to sleep in a tent at night made this kind of happiness overflow from their hearts. They did not need to sleep on the ground in the open anymore. Although the tent was small, it was really warm. There was a layer of fluffy grass at the bottom of the tent, and there was also a temporary pillow. It was no longer a hard and cold ground. Even if the wind blew in at night, it was blocked by layers of palm leaves. The people inside would not be woken up by the cold. As for the space in the tent being too small and not being able to turn over, what turn over? Was the day's work not tiring enough? With such good conditions, you still can't satisfy them? Bah, don't be ungrateful. When Jean of Needles and the others fell asleep in the tent, they were all smiling. Then, with smiles on their faces, they woke up on the fourth day after entering the oasis. They all heard a strange sound. This sound was like thousands of snakes rolling over. The light of dawn tore through the darkness of the night, and everyone could see the truth. A large group of acid green lizards was pouring into the oasis. Chapter 79. The acid green lizards strode forward with their 4 thick legs, showing off their strong and powerful figures. Jean estimated that there were at least 300 green lizards in this batch. Among them, there were more than 30 dark iron lizards, more than 60 bronze lizards, and the rest were normal green lizards. After the lizards entered the oasis, they went on a rampage, sweeping everything away. Then, without stopping, they rushed into the lake as if they were sprinting. There were many lizards' footprints left by the lake, and there were also traces of their tails dragging on the ground. The surface of the lake was no longer calm, and there were sparkling waves. The dark green and emerald scales of the lizards were washed clean, and there was no more dust from the desert. Some of the dark iron and bronze lizards began to have fun. They dove into the lake, strode forward, swung their tails, and swam in the lake. After swimming for a while, they swam up again and breathed in the foggy air through their nostrils. Most of the lizards stood in the shallow water, lowering their heads and opening their mouths to drink water. These lizards are hungry and thirsty. Zidi's eyes were filled with worry. Hungry beasts were full of aggression. Beside her stood Jinjin and Song-Su with serious expressions. Baya rushed over. After a good night's sleep, he finally had the strength to move. When he heard the movements of the lizards, he could no longer hold back and walked over with difficulty. After rushing to Jin's side, he bent over and sat on the ground with his hands on the ground. He panted heavily as he looked at the lizards in the distance. Baya's face was very pale, and he said intermittently, "The lizards are here." Huff, huff, will the scorpions come? His broken bones still needed a long time to heal, and he could not compare to Jin's recovery ability. However, as time passed, the 4 people who were observing the movements of the lizards gradually relaxed. The appearance of the beast horde in the oasis was already within everyone's expectations. After all, they had deduced that there was a large water source nearby based on the beast horde. Another reason for the group to relax was that the lizards were all playing around by the lake. They rarely came out and wandered around the oasis to look for food. When Jin was building this temporary camp, he had already considered the possibility of the beasts drinking water. Therefore, the location of the temporary camp was quite good. Jin's eyes flickered. In his opinion, these lizards were food. Looking at their robust bodies, weren't they just moving piles of dried meat? These lizards are still drinking water. They can actually hold so much water. How terrifying! Baya exclaimed after watching for a while. The lizards were still yelling loudly. Among them, the bronze-ranked and iron-ranked lizards were still in the lake. They opened their mouths wide, allowing the lake water to pour into their wide throats. Song-Su muttered, "That's because this kind of acid lizard has 3 stomachs, one of which is used to digest food. The other 2 auxiliary stomachs were used to store water. They are natural giant water bags. With their physique, they need a lot of water to move around. Don't forget, they can also spray acid. To produce this kind of acid in the body, they need a lot of water to participate." Song-Su had dissected a green-skinned lizard before, so he had a good understanding of this kind of beast. "Maybe we can put these lizard stomachs into water bags?" ZD suddenly suggested. Of course, She knew that the progress of making clay pots was very slow. Sang-soo thought for a while. We can try. Everyone discussed for a while and decided that Jun-jin would secretly hunt these lizards. ZD and Sang-soo continued with their unfinished work. Bai was still very weak, so he still focused on recuperating. However, Bai insisted on working. Jun-jin saw the young man's eager eyes and gave him the job of making the hemp rope. Carrying an iron saber and an iron sword on his back, Jun-jin left the temporary camp. Climbing up a slanted coconut tree that was relatively easy to climb, Jun-jin had a wide field of vision and carefully investigated. He didn't find any lizards around the camp. Jun-jin climbed down the tree and slowly approached the lizards by the lake. The lizards were more concentrated, which made the temporary camp safer. However, it also made it more difficult for Jun-jin to hunt. Jun-jin didn't want to act rashly and anger the whole group of beasts, causing them to chase after him. The nature of beasts was hard to predict. If Jun-jin fell into the group of beasts, he would also be in danger. If Sang-soo, ZD, Baya, and Lanzeo were affected, it would be even more dangerous. Although Jun-jin could turn into a silver spear scorpion, the group of lizards was very large, far larger than the group they encountered in the Golden Stones. In addition, Jun-jin didn't plan to use his heart core. There are many reasons. The first reason was that the sudden appearance of a silver spear scorpion was very suspicious. Sang-soo and ZD were very smart. The more Jun-jin deceived them, the more likely he would be exposed. The second reason was that Jun-jin was very wary of the heart core. The heart core absorbed the blood of other life forms. This kind of transformation was very cruel and evil. As a temple knight, Jun-jin had a natural repulsion and loathing towards this kind of thing. The third reason was that Jun-jin was also very worried. He couldn't understand the nature of the heart core and was worried about the possible hidden dangers. His intuition told him that the more he used the heart core, the more likely he would walk in the opposite direction of the knight's path. Jun-jin was not anxious. His young and handsome face didn't have a trace of childishness, but was filled with a reliable and steady temperament. Countless times of suffering and despair had tempered his body and mind. Jun-jin decided to take a look first and wait for the opportunity to hunt. Croak, croak, croak. What's that sound? Jun-jin revealed a puzzled look. After waiting for about an hour, he heard a strange sound coming from the lake. The sound was very similar to the croaking of frogs, but if one listened carefully, they would realize that this sound was even more muffled. Jun-jin looked over, but didn't find any frogs, but at this time, the lizards were acting strangely. A large number of lizards rushed into the lake, moving their limbs and swimming quickly. They opened their mouths and started fighting in the water, causing waves to splash. There were also lizards that raised their heads and shot out acid. The acid shot into the air and suddenly hit a transparent existence. Under the influence of the green acid, the transparent beast revealed its true appearance. It was a type of fish, like a puffer fish that swelled up after encountering an enemy. It was white and fat like a ball, floating in the air, relying on its light yellow tail and fins to swim. Their bodies had sharp black fish bones, and it was them that made the croaking sound. After being corroded by the acid, these fat ball flying fish fell into the lake. The surrounding lizards swarmed over, fighting with each other, and quickly ate the fat ball flying fish. What's going on? Sang-soo and ZD were attracted by this strange phenomenon. These fat ball flying fish were hiding in the depths of the lake, and now they've been provoked by the lizards. Jun-jin guessed. Strange, we can't see these fat ball flying fish with our naked eyes, but we can see the lizards clearly. ZD frowned slightly. Sang-soo's eyes flashed with a thoughtful light. I think I know the reason for this. These acid green lizards have the same visual system as many snakes. What they see is formed by their own heat, and the higher the heat, the more it attracts the attention of these acid green lizards. These fat ball flying fish, let's call them that for now, more or less have heat. We can't see them with our naked eyes, probably because their skin has a camouflage effect similar to that of chameleons. The fat ball flying fish were being hunted by the lizards in large numbers. They escaped from the water and slowly floated up into the air. However, the lizards could shoot acid, and they shot them down one by one. Zhenjin noticed that these fat ball-flying fish also had a way to counterattack. Some of them would explode, and a ball of hot water would burst out. The black fish bones on the surface of their bodies would shoot out in all directions with the explosion. The fish bones were obviously poisonous, and after piercing the lizards, Zhenjin could see that the wounds immediately turned black. The flesh and scales on the black wounds were rapidly rotting. The wounds were originally small, but in a few breaths, they quickly expanded to the size of a bowl. However, the lizards had a countermeasure against this. When they saw their companions that had been hit by fish bones, the surrounding lizards would surround them and cover the black wounds with their mouths and suck hard. The terrifying black poison would be sucked into the poison glands in the lizards' mouths. Then, the lizards would open their mouths to shoot out poison. The originally green acid would turn dark green because of the black poison, and its power would increase greatly. Song-Su's eyes flashed with a bright light as he thought of the results of dissecting lizards. He suddenly realized the lizards' mouths are hidden in their mouths to shoot out poison glands. When the muscles of these spouts expand, they can suck in liquid from the outside. Sucking in the poison is equivalent to detoxifying the other lizards. So this organ has such a wonderful use. The acid green lizards had been bullied badly by the scorpions, and many of them had been slaughtered by the exploration team. However, they were now on a killing spree. They were very effective against the fat ball-flying fish. It seems like these fat ball-flying fish are the lizards' staple food, ZD guessed. Gua gua gua. Gua gua gua. After watching the battle for a while, the fat ball-flying fish's cries became more frequent and louder. The expressions of Zhenjin and the others gradually changed. More and more fat ball-flying fish appeared in the battle, and their numbers were increasing at a terrifying speed. This was only what they could see with their naked eyes. There were many more that they could not see. There were too many fat ball-flying fish. They quickly gained the advantage in numbers and surrounded the lizards. After the lizards ate and drank large amounts of water, their aggressiveness was greatly reduced. The fat ball-flying fish's counterattack became stronger and stronger, and the lizards turned around and retreated. The pitch-black poisonous fish bones flew out continuously. Many lizards that were hit by the fish bones after their companions stopped in their tracks to let them absorb the poison. In the end, they were pierced by the fish bones all over their bodies. In a dozen breaths' time, these lizards turned into puddles of black water. They diluted in the vast lake and quickly disappeared without a trace. Chapter 80. The death rate of the lizards increased rapidly. The black iron and bronze-ranked green lizards were the first to escape, and the rest of the group began to flee. The fat ball-flying fish chased after them relentlessly. One of the lizards panicked and ran all the way to where Zhenjin and the others were hiding. Zhenjin had no choice but to jump out and use the sandow to slash at the same spot on the lizard's neck, killing it instantly. "Let's go." Zhenjin's face was serious as he covered Song-Su and ZD to retreat quickly. He was not worried about the lizards, but the fat ball-flying fish. The green lizards could see them, but the human eye could not capture their tracks. Against an invisible opponent, this was too passive. Although the lizard was killed by Zhenjin, the croaking sounds followed closely behind. They were getting closer and closer, and their malice was obvious. It was obvious that the fat ball-flying fish had been provoked into a frenzy. Whether it was lizards or anything else, they were all targets. "Run back to the camp. You'll be a burden to me if you stay here." Zhenjin's expression changed slightly as he shouted. Song-Su and ZD immediately turned around and ran with all their might. However, the croaking sounds were getting closer and closer. Damn it, they're too fast. If no one stops them, they won't be able to escape. Zhenjin, who was in charge of bringing up the rear, gritted his teeth and suddenly stopped in his tracks. He turned around and faced the empty sky. He could not see the enemy, so he could not determine the exact location of the fat ball-flying fish. However, Sangsu's words just now were still lingering in his ears. I think I know the reason behind this. The acid green lizard's visual system is similar to many snakes. The higher the heat, the more it can attract the attention of these acid green lizards. These fat ball flying fish, let's call them that for now, more or less carry heat. We can't see them with the naked eye, probably because their skin has a camouflaging effect, similar to that of chameleons. Even though Jinjin had warned him not to touch his heart core so easily, he knew that he had to be careful. However, in this situation, if he didn't use it, not only would Jinjin's life be in danger, but ZD, Sangsu, and the others would also die under the pursuit of the fat ball flying fish. In the next moment, the core was activated by Jinjin. Jinjin's pupils changed. A human's pupils were round, but now his pupils had become vertical, turning into a kind of earthen yellow, emitting a cold and cruel aura of a wild beast. He now had the eyes of an acid lizard. Jinjin was stunned. The acid lizard's vision was very different from a human's. Its colors were very monotonous, like an oil painting painted by a bad novice. The outline of the food was not clear. The acid green lizard's entire field of vision was pale yellow. The trees were dark green, and the lake was dark blue. These 2 points were somewhat similar to human vision. The acid green lizard's body was also green, but it was not as dark as the trees. As for the fat ball flying fish, every one of them was red. Some were pale red, some were bright red, and some were dark red. I finally see it. Jinjin felt relieved, and his spirits were lifted. There were a total of 6 fat ball flying fish chasing after Jinjin and the others. 2 of them were bright red, while the other 4 were pale red. It seemed to be related to the level of life forms. Jinjin took out a wooden dart, and it changed again. Bear's arm. Whoosh, 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 6 darts shot out one after another, creating sharp sounds in the air. The 6 fat ball flying fish were shot down one after another. They seemed to want to dodge, but the darts were simply too fast. Most of the flying fish fell to the ground, but 2 of them were shot to death, but before they died, they self-destructed. The pitch-black fish bones shot out from the self-detonation were like a torrential downpour, enveloping Jinjin. Jinjin found that he could not dodge, so he immediately bent down and hugged his knees and legs, tried to curl himself into a ball. At the same time, he activated his heart core for the 3rd time. Almost in an instant, a red light flashed, and a hard scorpion shell grew out of his body. The pitch-black fish bones shot at the scorpion shell, creating a series of crisp sounds. Jinjin stretched his limbs and stood up again. He saw a large number of fish bones scattered around his feet. He checked his scorpion shell again and found that it was intact. My shell came from a silver-ranked spear scorpion after all. Jinjin rushed to the fat ball flying fish's corpse. Almost all that was left of the fat ball flying fish's corpse was a tattered fish skin. The fat ball flying fish was the size of an adult's head, but the skin left behind after its death had been blown apart by the explosion. The largest piece of skin on the ground was only the size of a palm. Moreover, no matter how big or small the skin was, there were small holes all over it. These are the places where the fish bones originally grew. Jinjin didn't see the fish's eyes, internal organs, and so on. They must have been blown away. Apart from the fish skin, the most abundant thing was the water contained in the fat ball flying fish's body. This was almost boiling water, emitting a strong, sulfuric smell that was very pungent. It was temporarily accumulated on the grass and was quickly seeping into the soil. It was hard to imagine that a fish's body contained boiling water. Jinjin was enlightened. I know. In the green lizard's vision, the higher the body temperature, the warmer the color. The lower the body temperature, the colder the color. Also, the light red fat ball flying fish should be a normal beast. The bright red fat ball flying fish has reached the bronze rank. Not only were the fat ball flying fish invisible to human eyes when it was alive, their life force was completely restrained, and there was no way to detect it. But after death, Jinjin could still feel the life force from these fish skins. These life forces were quickly dissipating. After hesitating for a while, Jinjin activated his heart core to absorb the fish skins and other remnants. After hurriedly cleaning up the battlefield, Jean immediately rushed back to the temporary camp. I have the lizard's eyes, so I can see these fat ball flying fish, but they can't. If they're surrounded, they won't even be able to find a target to attack. Jean was very worried. At this time, a large number of fat ball flying fish were floating in the sky, and more fat ball flying fish were continuously emerging from the lake. The lizards attracted most of the fat ball flying fish. Looking from the lizard's vision, there were densely packed red dots behind them, almost covering the sky. The new school of fish also joined in the pursuit of the lizards. The lizards fled towards the desert, moving quickly. The location of the temporary camp became worse. It was now between the lizards and the lake. The fat ball flying fish swam in the air, and because there were no obstacles, their path was completely straight. This caused the following school of flying fish to pass by the temporary camp. Oh no! Halfway there, Jean noticed this trend, and his face darkened. According to his previous experience, these fat ball flying fish would most likely take the initiative to attack Song, Su, and ZD after discovering them. I have to lure them away. Jean took out his darts again and shot them continuously. The fat ball flying fish fell to the ground one by one, and many self-destructed before they died. Shark fins flew everywhere, causing more fat ball flying fish to self-destruct before they died. The school of flying fish was attacked, and they croaked loudly. They immediately changed their target of revenge from the lizards to Jean. Seeing that he had successfully provoked the school of fish, Jean fully activated his heart core. From the inside to the outside, red light spewed out. The red light covered his entire body, and his human form quickly collapsed, forming the outline of a spear scorpion. In the next moment, the red light dispersed, and Jean had disappeared, leaving behind only a silver spear scorpion. The school of fish stared fixedly at Jean, witnessing the entire change, but they still rushed toward Jean. Good timing. Jean was overjoyed. He immediately moved his 4 pairs of appendages and increased his speed. The speed of the needle gold was very fast. In fact, the spear scorpion speed was faster than the lizards. This had been proven many times in the previous beast fights. Jean turned into a silver spear scorpion. The only trouble was that it was difficult for the golden needle to change its direction while running wildly. Fortunately, the retreat route of the lizards was a large arc. There were very few trees and rocks in the desert oasis, so they could not stop Jean from running. Jean purposely went around the temporary camp, attracting the school of fish that were flying out to catch up with the lizards. As the lizards ran, they suddenly realized that a silver spear scorpion had cut into their group. Hiss! The lizards screamed, and they became even more chaotic due to shock and fear. The lizard around Jean tried their best, tried to distance themselves from Jean. Don't run. Jean stuck closely in the middle of the lizards. He followed wherever the lizards ran. This time, the school of fish in the air behind him felt very comfortable. Because their targets for revenge were all in one place, there was no need to be conflicted. The poisonous fish stings hit the lizards, and they fell one by one. When they hit Jean's body, they made a crisp sound. Jean was still alive and kicking. After Jean gradually got used to running among the lizards, he had an idea. He swung his scorpion tail and stabbed repeatedly. The scorpion tail was slender and had a wide attack range. The lizards could not dodge in time and could only die one by one under the scorpion tail. The dead lizards rolled on the ground a few times due to inertia and lay quietly on the ground as corpses. The school of fish did not take revenge on these corpses. Just like that, under the double attack of Jean and the school of fish, the lizards suffered heavy losses. In the end, less than 80 lizards successfully escaped back into the desert. Taking advantage of the last moment of panic, Jean finally found a chance to escape. He immediately ran back to the temporary camp. There was a battle in the camp. In fact, most of the fat ball flying fish had been attracted by Jean and the lizards. The number of fat ball flying fish left in the oasis was very small, and they were scattered all over the place. Unfortunately, The temporary camp was visited by a few fat ball-flying fish. Oh no! Zhen Jin's head sank. He saw traces of battle nearby, and all kinds of signs indicated that the battle in the temporary camp had already started and had been going on for a long time. Rushing into the camp, he found the blue-green algae at a glance. Lan Zhao stood in the center of the camp. His hair was disheveled, and his face was still covered in blood. He held a scimitar in each hand, and he raised his head and shouted, "Get lost! Get lost! Get lost! A bunch of rotten fish and shrimps. You want to eat me? Only I can eat you. You can't eat me." As he said that, his ears moved slightly. He suddenly turned around and waved his iron scimitar, accurately hitting a fat ball-flying fish. Chapter 81. The fat ball-flying fish was killed by Lan Zhao with a single slash. Fortunately, it did not self-destruct. Zhen Jin's head shook slightly. He was curious as to how Lan Zhao had determined the fat ball-flying fish's location. "Sir," Zidi's voice came from the tent next to him. Baya and Tsang Su also poked their heads out of the palm tree tent. They were all hiding in the tents. Even if a normal fishbone was shot out, it would be blocked by the layers of palm tree leaves. Seeing that they were safe and sound, Jin Jun felt relieved. He focused on the center of the camp and saw that Lan Zhao was injured, with a few fish bones stuck in his body. He was shot by a fish bone, but he didn't die from the poison. Jin Jin was puzzled. He took out a dart and guessed. This means that the poison is relatively mild to the human body. The poison is more effective against lizards. I have to kill these fat ball-flying fish immediately. The lizards have been scattered, and most of the fish are returning. If this drags on, the fish will definitely be attracted to the battle here. When that happens, I won't be able to protect the others with my combat ability alone. In this situation, Zhen Jin could only take a gamble. The young knight could not discover the fat ball-flying fish, but he could mutate. He immediately shifted his position so that Tsang Su and the others could not see his eyes. He then narrowed his eyes and activated his heart core. With the help of the lizard's eyes, he immediately discovered the fat ball-flying fish in midair. Including the one that Lan Zhao had just killed, there were a total of 5 fat ball-flying fish in the camp. The remaining 3 were light red, but one of them was the largest and had a deep red color. It was obviously a dark iron flying fish. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. 5 darts shot out. One of them missed, while the others hit all the flying fish at the same time. The 3 normal flying fish were pierced through, unable to self-destruct in time. But the dark iron flying fish detonated itself at the last moment. With a whoosh, it was as if a storm had covered the entire camp. The force of the fishbone was very strong, and the palm tents could not withstand it. Zidi immediately let out a low cry. She had been shot. Zhen Jin's head tightened, and he hurried over. A black fishbone was stuck under Zidi's right shoulder, close to her chest. "Sir," Zidi looked nervous. "Let me see." Zhen Jin went into the tent and hugged Zidi. He tore a hole in her apprentice's cloak and exposed her wound. On Zidi's delicate skin, the pitch-black poison was spreading at a speed visible to the naked eye. "This is a black iron-ranked poison." Zhen Jin immediately reached out to pull out the fishbone, then lowered his head, pressed his lips tightly against the wound, and sucked. At this moment, Zidi's pupils shrank as she felt a strong suction force near her chest. She subconsciously reached out to push Zhen Jin's chest, but Zhen Jin did not move. His whole body and arms were like cast iron, holding Zidi tightly in his arms. Just like this, before the poison could spread, most of it was sucked out by Zhen Jin. Zidi blushed and stammered, "Sir, I have medicine. It can cure this poison." As she spoke, she took out a small glass bottle from her bag. The medicine inside was light blue and slightly viscous. Zhen Jin opened the bottle and spat the light blue liquid on the wound, according to Zidi's request. The pitch-black poison immediately dissipated when it came in contact with the light blue liquid. The effect was very good. Zhen Jin was speechless. The young knight realized his recklessness and looked a little embarrassed. He coughed and said, "That's good. I'll go check on the others." Zhenjin crawled out of ZD's tent to check on the others. Baya and Song Su had already come out of the tent. They had the antidotes that ZD had given them earlier, but they were lucky that they had not been hit by the last wave of fish bones. Lan Zhao, on the other hand, was in trouble. He had been hit by several dark, iron-level poisonous fish bones. He was now half kneeling on the ground, using his sword to support himself. He gritted his teeth and stared angrily, trying to hold on. But soon, a dark look appeared on his face, and an extreme dizziness came over him. Lan Zhao could not hold on any longer and fell to the ground with a thud. Baya and Song Su hurriedly surrounded Lan Zhao and pulled out the fish bones from his body. They poured the light blue liquid on his wound. The poison in Lan Zhao's wound slowly dissipated, but the dark look on Lan Zhao's face became more intense. It's too late. He's been poisoned too deeply. ZD had tidied up her clothes and came out of the tent to see this scene. "No, Lord Cyanobacteria, you saved our lives. You must hold on," Baya shouted. He forced Lan Zhao's mouth open and poured the light blue liquid in. It turned out that not long after ZD had rushed back to the camp, she had been hit by a fishbone. She had tried many antidotes and found that the light blue liquid had a strong antidote effect on the poison. She immediately distributed the antidotes. Even Lan Zhao was given a bottle. Lan Zhao had been curled up in the tent, motionless and ready to die. But when a fat ball flying fish attacked, under the stimulation of death, he gulped down a bottle of light blue liquid. With a roar, he opened the tent and launched a desperate counterattack. Lan Zhao's action surprised Song Su and ZD. When they found that Lan Zhao seemed to have the ability to identify the fat ball flying fish's position, they immediately threw their swords to Lan Zhao. Just like that, the crazy Lan Zhao counterattacked in the middle of the camp, attracting the attention of all the fat ball flying fish. Every time a fat ball flying fish got close to Lan Zhao seemed to sense it and wave his sword to force the fat ball flying fish back. Just like that, Lan Zhao bought precious time and successfully delayed the battle until Zhenjin came back. It could be said that without Lan Zhao's persistence, ZD and the others would have lost their lives. "I want to live. I don't want to die. I really don't want to die. Please, I beg you, save me. Sir, save me." The dying Lan Zhao grabbed Zhenjin's trousers and weakly begged. People were really strange. Lan Zhao wanted to die so badly that he didn't even hesitate to go on a hunger strike. However, when death really approached him, he revealed a strong desire to live. Zhenjin was moved. "Do your best to keep him alive," the young knight ordered in a commanding tone, showing his determination. Although Jin Jun hadn't been told the whole story yet, he could guess the thrilling battle in the camp at this moment. It was Lan Zhao who saved ZD, Baya, and Song Su. What touched Jin Jin's heart even more was that at this moment, he saw himself in Lan Zhao. "I'll do my best." ZD checked Lan Zhao's wounds, opened the small leather pouch at her waist, and started to concoct medicine on the spot. After a dozen breaths, ZD poured the medicine into Lan Zhao's mouth. The black color on Lan Zhao's face slowly faded, and his wounds turned black again. Black blood flowed out. But Lan Zhao's breath was getting weaker and weaker, and he was on the verge of death. "I need to concoct more." ZD gritted her teeth. Her forehead was already covered in sweat. Seeing this, she quickly lowered her head and concocted the medicine again. Her hands moved faster than usual. "He can't hold on much longer." Baya was panicking. "Hold on," Zhenjin said in a low voice. Lan Zhao's eyelids twitched, but they slowly closed again. Sigh. Song Su's eyes dimmed, and he sighed. "Let me do it," Baya suddenly shouted, and drank the light blue medicine in one gulp. Then, he threw himself on Lan Zhao's body, and used his mouth to suck the black blood flowing out of his wounds. "Stop." Song Su hurriedly stopped her and reached out to grab Baya's shoulder, wanting to pull her up. Using the mouth to suck the poison can indeed reduce the concentration of the poison in the wound, but it's very dangerous and can cause the user to be poisoned. You're just an ordinary person, Baya. Baya was pulled away a little, but he still half knelt on the ground and shook off Song Su. He didn't even look back as he shouted, "This is a human life, and it was Master Lon Zao who saved us." He lowered his head again and took a big gulp of the poison. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. On his deathbed, Lon Zao heard the sound of waves again. His vision was blurry, and he saw the light blue sky and the deep blue sea. He saw the yellow sand bumping into him, and then he fell on the sand. "Brother, brother, pull yourself together." Huang Zao, who was still a child, shouted and struggled to pull the young Lon Zao's body to lie on the sand. A colorful pentagonal starfish was lying on Lon Zao's chest. Huang Zao removed the pentagonal starfish, and Lon Zao's poison wound was exposed. Huang Zao immediately lowered his head, sucked the poison out of the wound, and then spat out mouthfuls of blood. The pentagonal starfish wasn't highly toxic, but it would make people's limbs go numb, and they wouldn't be able to use strength. The reason Lon Zao fainted wasn't because of the pentagonal starfish's poison, but because of the numbness and drowning. He hadn't been able to breathe for a long time. Lon Zao gradually woke up. "Brother," he looked at Huang Zao and murmured, "Brother, you're awake. Don't die. I only have you left, brother." The child Huang Zao raised his head, crying and crying. Lon Zao heard Huang Zao's cry and tried to smile. He couldn't speak, but he tried his best to comfort his young brother. But at this time, the sound in his ears gradually changed. "He's awake, he's alive. He's not dead." This was Baya's voice. Then, Lon Zao's blurry vision became clear. The child Huang Zao disappeared, and in its place was an excited Baya with a mouth full of black blood. Lon Zao's heart was empty, but he tried again, trying to smile. He didn't know whether he smiled or not. He opened his mouth, wanting to speak. He wanted to say, "I want to live, I don't want to die. I want to continue living." But in the next moment, he fell into a coma. Chapter 82. 8 days later, Zhenjin and the others came to the boundary between the desert and the forest. This time, they were finally heading in the right direction. They successfully walked out of the desert and returned to the forest area. Taking a step forward, there was a dense forest landscape. Behind them, there was an endless yellow-brown desert. Towering trees rose straight into the sky. The continuous greenery converged into a wall that extended out of sight. The wall isolated the desert from the wind and sand, and the wall contained vitality. Song Su let out a breath of turbid air and took out a sheepskin map from his bosom. He took out a charcoal pen and began to draw lines on the map. "Although this place is not the same as the place where I entered the forest last time, the distance between the two should not be far. Lord Jinjin, I suggest that we don't rush into the forest. Instead, we explore along this boundary until we find the previous place," Song Su suggested while drawing the map with his head down. Zhen Jin's eyes flashed as he carefully considered Song Su's suggestion. According to the time calculation, there was still plenty of time before the next teleportation. If they were unlucky enough to be teleported to the desert again, then the more complete the map, the more help it could provide. Indeed, it is necessary to spend some time exploring and perfecting the map. However, I have stayed in the desert for long enough. "Let's go into the forest first," Zhen Jin said. As soon as he finished speaking, someone beside him cheered. It was like a hunting dog that had been locked up for a long time and suddenly came to the wilderness. It broke free from its reins and ran into the forest in front of them. "Ah!" The young man who rushed into the forest exclaimed in enjoyment. He raised his head, opened his arms, and breathed in the forest air. He shouted with a hoarse voice, this is the smell of the forest. How sweet." Then, he knelt on the ground and reached out to touch the grass, as if he was stroking the hair of his beloved girl. "How soft, how dense." He suddenly stood up and threw himself on a tree. He wrapped his arms around the trunk and kissed the bark with his thick black lips. "This is where I should be." This young man was Baya. Baya was originally the son of a hunter. He grew up in a mountain village and was very familiar with the forest. He had narrowly escaped death and came to the forest from the desert. He felt as if he had returned home. Compared to when he was in the forest, he had changed a lot. His lips had become thicker, like two fish intestines, and his lips were very dark. His voice also became hoarse and unpleasant. These changes were because he had sucked the black, poisonous blood from Lan Zeo's wound with his mouth in the oasis. Jinjin had also sucked Zed's wound before, but the young knight's physique was very strong, so nothing happened. Baya, on the other hand, was just an ordinary person. Although he had taken the light blue potion in advance, there were still very strong after-effects. Baya's change was not only reflected in his appearance, but also in his temperament. After going through a life and death experience, Baya seemed to have opened the door to his heart. He was originally reserved, but now he was open and had transformed into a chatterbox. It was as if he did not say everything he wanted to say, he would feel very uncomfortable and regretful. Baya, this guy? Everyone laughed. They all understood how Baya felt. Only Lan Zeo was expressionless. He was at the back of the group, carrying a large number of water bags. Most of these water bags were made from the stomach pouches of the acid green lizards. Only a few of them were clay pots. Perhaps there was a problem with the soil in the oasis, but Sang Su's clay pots kept failing. Only a few of them were finished. However, with the combined efforts of the fat ball flying fish and Jinjin, the green lizards left many corpses in the oasis. When the fat ball flying fish returned to the depths of the lake, Jinjin brought people to deal with the green lizards. Their flesh was cut into pieces, and their skin was made into leather clothes. The stomach pouches were taken out, cleaned, and sewed into simple water bags. Thanks to Baya's risk and Zed's potion, Lan Zeo's life was saved. This middle-aged man, who was originally calm and strong, had also undergone a huge change. He became taciturn, unable to say a single word for a day. It gave people the illusion that he had lost the ability to speak. He would only lower his head when responding to Zhang Jin's orders. "Yes, master." "Understood, master." "As you command, my master." Zed's expression suddenly changed. She took a few steps forward, grabbed Baya's shoulder, and pulled him back. Baya was pressing his cheek against a tree trunk. He turned around and looked at Zed with a puzzled expression. "Master Zed?" Zed pointed at the tree trunk. "You're poisoned." Baya was stunned and dumbfounded. What? Jinjin looked at the tree trunk and saw a thin layer of green moss. "Isn't this the green-spotted moss that poisoned me before?" Jinjin suddenly understood. Even now, he could still mutate this kind of poisonous moss through his heart core. After that, Zed collected the moss and made the potion to cure Baya's poison. Although we returned to the forest from the desert, don't forget that we are still on this dangerous and strange island. We can't be careless. Sang Su reminded Baya. Baya's encounter calmed everyone down. The dense trees were like giant umbrellas. They were rooted deep in the ground, and the branches and leaves that grew without restraint blocked the scorching sun. The temperature in the forest was much lower than in the desert. At noon, Zhang Jin and the others did not dare to walk casually in the desert. Most of the time, they hid behind the sand dunes and gasped for breath. But in the forest, they could still travel at noon. This greatly increased the team's exploration efficiency. Zhang Jin walked at the front of the team. 3 iron-feathered birds suddenly descended from the sky. These birds were also the creation of the island's owner. They were only the size of an adult's fist and liked to climb trees. They would jump down from the high treetops and use gravity to charge forward and peck at other creatures. The iron-feathered bird's speed was comparable to an arrow shot from crossbow. 2 iron-feathered birds rushed toward Jinjin, while the last one rushed toward Zed. Zed raised her head. Before she could exclaim, she heard a sharp whoosh. Then, the iron-feathered bird that was rushing toward her was hit by a wooden dart and flew away in a straight line. With a bang, the dart was deeply embedded in the trunk of a tree. The iron-feathered bird was like meat on a skewer. Its body was pressed against the tree trunk, motionless. Almost at the same time that the iron-feathered bird died, Jean held the wooden spear tightly in his left hand. Like a poisonous snake coming out of its hole, he nimbly tapped twice in succession. The two iron-feathered birds that were rushing toward Jean were struck by the spear tip. Their momentum immediately disappeared, and their lifeless bodies fell to the ground powerlessly. The crisis suddenly descended, but was perfectly resolved by Jean in an instant. Lan Zhao's hand had just touched the hilt of his saber. Bai Ye's hair stood on end, and his muscles tensed up. Everything returned to normal. Wow, wow, wow. Lord Jean, you are really too powerful. How many times have the iron-feathered birds attacked us? You saved us once again. Your martial arts are simply, Bai Ye shouted, looking at Jean with shining eyes. Admiration and love overflowed from the bottom of his heart. Concise and refined, simple and unadorned, but always resolute in killing and outstanding in battle. Song Su continued Bai Ye's words. Yes, these are the words. Bai Ye looked at Song Su again. Sir Scholar, you can always say what I want to say the most. Sir, ZD smiled at Jean. Lan Zhao was still silent, but his eyes were not calm as he looked at Jean. After the five of them entered the forest, Jean took the lead and perfectly dealt with many attacks by himself. Originally, everyone was worried that this kind of exploration was too fast and would increase the risk. However, under the protection of the Golden Needle, any attack would turn into his victory. Hearing everyone's comments, Jean first controlled his core, and the lizard pupils in his eye sockets turned back into human eyes. Then he turned around and looked at everyone behind him. His handsome face had a smile, and even though his golden hair was covered in dust, it seemed to sparkle, shining brightly in everyone's eyes. After the previous ordeal, my martial arts seemed to have entered a different realm. I can't use fighting energy, and the power of every attack hasn't changed. However, it was as if I didn't even need to think about each of my actions. They were executed very naturally. This way, it seems that the timing of my attacks is much earlier than before. This was actually because Jean had used the green lizard's eyes to observe all kinds of hidden life forms. For example, although the iron-feathered birds were hiding in the lush foliage above their heads, in the green lizard's vision, there were layers of dark green with a red ball behind them. It was very conspicuous. Therefore, Jean was able to take precautions in advance. Every time they attacked, Jean was already prepared, and every time he acted, it was very timely. Of course, the green lizard's eyes were also flawed, and they could not see things clearly. Therefore, after Jean used it for the first time in the oasis, he improved its usage. Now, he mutated one eye and kept the other eye in its original human form. Every once in a while, the state of the two eyes would be switched. Because Jean was walking at the front, and because he narrowed his eyes to observe, the others in the group were kept in the dark. Song Su muttered, "Perhaps this is the power of the heart?" P.S. I recommend a good book, Xinxia genre, very charming. Dao Seeking the Mortal World. Qin Yi once thought that people who cultivate immortality must be indifferent and peaceful, have no desires, be patient, and be able to withstand temptations. But in the end, he realized that immortality has a human side. The road to immortality is bitter and cold. You and I hug each other to keep warm. Chapter 83. What is the power of the mind? Bai Ye immediately expressed the doubts in his heart. It sounds illusory. Song Su smiled. I can't train, so I'm not too sure what the power of the mind is. But from what I know, there are many examples of people who can use the power of the mind. The elite warriors of the barbarians who live in the Frost Continent mostly have the ability to dodge instinctively. When they're attacked by unseen attacks, or when they're ambushed, they have the ability to dodge. According to the research of scholars, the essence of this instinctive dodge is the power of the mind. If this ability is stronger, it can even detect traps. There are many areas of ice avalanche in the Frost Continent. There's a very large area of ice with a crucial point of ice avalanche. It is fine to jump and run around in other areas of the ice. But if you step on this point of ice avalanche, the entire ice surface will shatter in an instant. Those who lose their footing often lose their lives. Explorers of other tribes often lose their lives in the areas of ice avalanche, or die from the attacks of magical beasts in the deep snow. But the elite barbarians, when their instinctive dodge ability reaches the level of being able to detect traps, they can avoid them in advance and walk safely in the snow. If this ability continues to improve, the barbarian warriors will not be afraid of being surrounded on the battlefield. They will always be able to rely on their instincts to avoid being caught in a pincer attack. Hearing this, Zhenjin could not help but have a thought. He remembered how he had once taken a risk to kill a group of lizards in order to save ZD, Song Su, and the others. Facing a siege, he did not panic. He calmly dealt with all the attacks, dodging the continuous attacks with ease. He was very similar to the barbarians. Song Su continued. In the wilderness continent, there is a storm sword saint. He is a saint-level fighter. Since he started training, he has only focused on the long sword in his hand. He does not wear armor and does not have any other weapons. He spends almost all of his energy on improving his sword skills. It is rumored that every time he strikes, it is so fast that people cannot see it clearly. His sword skills are extremely simple. Every time he strikes, he can take the life of at least one enemy. This Storm Sword Saint has an extremely high reputation and influence among the Beastmen. Many Beastmen worship him. That's because the Dochi art he cultivates is very ordinary and his bloodline isn't outstanding either. Yet, he was able to reach such a high level. This is the example and hope for most of the Beastmen who don't have good talent or good Dochi arts. The Galestorm Sword Saint once explained to the orcs who came to him for guidance, "Focus on your heart and focus on your sword." People speculated that he had developed the power of his spirit and projected it onto his sword, reaching the legendary state of being one with the sword. "Is there such a person among the orcs?" Baya exclaimed. "If that's the case, why are the orcs still unable to raise their heads after being beaten by us humans?" Zhen Jin shook his head and said seriously, "Don't underestimate the orcs. Since the beasts were able to dominate the entire wasteland continent, they naturally had many heroes. We may have the upper hand now, but in reality, we've only taken a corner of the wasteland continent. We've only taken down one of the beastkin tribes. The true potential of the orcs has yet to be unleashed." Bayu was just an ordinary person who had gone to the wasteland continent with the intention of making a name for himself. He wanted to become a knight. There were many people like him. The Empire's political propaganda deliberately weakened the strength of the orcs and promoted the benefits and prospects of war. This encouraged the various classes of the Empire to flock to the wasteland continent. Zhen Jin and the Hundred Needles family were among them. However, as a noble, Zhen Jin's outlook was much higher than Baya's. The middle and lower classes were all optimistic about the future of the human race in the wasteland continent. Almost all of the elites knew that this was only the early stages of the human race's invasion. They had only just gained a foothold. In the future, a true war would be needed to determine the outcome of the war between the two races. The wasteland continent is at least twice the size of the Shengming continent, but it only produced one Galestorm Sword Saint. He's special. His bloodline is the cornerstone of his strength. In terms of overall strength, we humans are far superior to the orcs. ZD expressed her opinion. "We will definitely win this war between the orcs and humans." ZD's optimism about the future was the most common understanding of the human race. She had to win. The Shengming continent had no room for the Wisteria Merchant Guild to develop. If the Wisteria Merchant Guild wanted to expand, the war between the orcs and humans was the best way. Zhen Jin did not continue to explain. He realized that as long as he said a little, Song Su would be able to say even more. Song Su's words were more convincing than his own explanation. Baya, however, did not let go of this topic. "How can I unlock the power of the mind? I want to become such a person." He did not have an outstanding bloodline and was only an ordinary hunter's son. Miss Sybil did not provide him with any material support. Therefore, Baiyu was very interested in the power of the mind. ZD chuckled. The Galestorm Sword Saint has already given you the answer to your question. Focus on your sword and your heart. This means that you have to focus all of your attention and energy on one point. So, Baiyu, if you want to learn from the Galestorm Sword Saint, you should first forget about Miss Sybil. How can I do that? Baiyu was stunned and shook his head. Everyone chuckled again. Baiyu heard the laughter and saw the mocking gazes of the others. He realized that he was being made fun of. He rubbed his head, his face flushed red. Despite his embarrassment, Baiyu gritted his teeth and looked at Jinjin with eyes full of worship, love, and inquiry. Lord Jinjin, do you have any insights? After a pause, Baiyu continued to ask, You have also grasped the power of the mind, but you are completely different from the Galestorm Sword Saint. You love Lady ZD. Lan Zhao and Song Su both glanced at Baiyu, thinking that Baiyu was really bold. Lan Zhao was a middle-aged man, while Song Su was an old man. Both of them had rich life experiences and understood the gap between the upper and lower classes. If it were them, they would definitely not ask a temple knight for tips on cultivation as an ordinary person. However, Baiyu was just a young man, and he had very little life experience. It was because of this that he fell in love with the noble Miss Sybil. Baiyu had the romantic naivety of youth. He was certain that Miss Sybil was waiting for him to become a knight and return home in glory to marry her. And after experiencing so much on this island, he was also facing the threat of death. For all these reasons, he yearned to obtain power. But he also understood the cruel side of reality. He did not have a bloodline advantage, nor did he have any cultivation resources. Thus, although the power of the mind sounded illusory, it had become his only hope. This was also the reason why the Galestorm Sword Saint was so influential and charming. Baiyu's straightforward words made ZD secretly size up Jinjin, a hint of shyness in her eyes. Jinjin coughed and rolled his eyes. Who knows what power of the mind is? He had only been able to reach this step because of the core of heart, but he did not want to continue lying. If he kept lying, there would only be more and more lies. Because as long as it was a lie, it was not the truth, and there would be flaws. Once there were flaws, the liar would have to use another lie to cover up the previous one. But how could there be no flaws in the latter lie? In this way, there would be more and more flaws, and in the end, the liar would be reduced to drinking poison to quench his thirst, sinking so deeply that he could not extricate himself. Moreover, to Jinjin, there was something more important. Lying was against the chivalry. In fact, Jinjin's lie to cover up his lizard pupils had already put him under a lot of pressure. Thus, he decided to tell the truth this time. Baiyu, I might have to disappoint you. I'm not too sure about the power of the mind. Perhaps it has something to do with my experience. After experiencing so many life and death situations, my mind has been tempered. I see. Baiyu's face was full of disappointment. This young man admired and trusted Jinjin greatly, and did not think that Jinjin was deliberately hiding anything. Jinjin wanted to comfort Baiyu, but after opening his mouth, he did not know what to say. He could only look expectantly at Song Su. Song Su did not disappoint him. The next moment, Song Su said to Baiyu, Lord Jinjin's words are very reasonable. Many scholars have analyzed and concluded that the true meaning of the Galestorm Sword Saint's cultivation is to place his life on the edge of a blade. Every battle, and even every cultivation, he has to face death. Under the stimulation of death, he gradually unearthed the power of the mind. And Lord Jinjin's experiences on the island are similar to the Galestorm Sword Saint's cultivation process of taking the initiative to abandon his armor and fight to the death with a strong enemy. Baiyu raised his eyebrows. So, in order to unearth the power of the mind, one has to take the initiative to explore and experience the stimulation of death? This is too dangerous, isn't it? Song Su said. So, the Galestorm Sword Saint has taken in many disciples, but he has not nurtured the next Galestorm Sword Saint. Although many excellent seeds have appeared, many more have died young. His cultivation method is too dangerous, and luck plays a large part in it. To this day, There has not been a single disciple who can completely inherit the mantle of the Galestorm Sword Saint. By his side, hearing this, he could only put away his thoughts. Although Baya was willing to take risks for the sake of obtaining power, he had his own bottom line. Seeking death for the sake of the power of the mind was already below his bottom line. Just like how Zhenjin shouldered the responsibility of reviving the family, Mishi'er's love and expectations were both his motivation and his burden to Baya. In the next moment, Baya looked at Zhenjin with even more admiration and respect. Lord Zhenjin, you are truly amazing. You are so young, but you have already grasped the power of the mind. Compared to the Galestorm Sword Saint, you have an even more outstanding bloodline. Among the Holy Knights, you are definitely the most special. To be able to meet you and follow you is truly my honor. By his side from the bottom of his heart, Zhenjin was speechless. It is not only my honor, but also my hope. ZD continued by Ya's words and looked at Zhenjin, her eyes filled with tenderness and love. Sangsu laughed and said with certainty, Lord Zhenjin's talent is outstanding, and he will definitely have a brighter future than the Galestorm Sword Saint. But what I admire the most is your moral character, Lord Zhenjin. With your words, the 100 Needles family will definitely rise again. Lan Zhao did not say anything. Hearing Tsang Su's words, he silently nodded. Like Tsang Su, he also recognized Zhen Jin's moral character. At this moment, Lan Zhao could not help but think back to the time he had spent with Zhenjin. He and Huang Zhao had knelt on the ground, and Zhenjin had pardoned their sins. This was kindness. Zhenjin had played with the bronze-ranked alpha ram in the palm of his hand and killed the leader of the flying squirrels. This was bravery. Zhenjin had listened many times and accepted the recommendations of Tsang Su, ZD, and the others. This was good at listening to other people's opinions. Zhenjin had led the entire team, and when faced with difficult choices, he had resolutely decided to cut wood and make bows, and had successfully hunted the flying squirrels. This was wise leadership. Poisoned, lacking food, being chased by a group of beasts in the desert, and facing so many crises, Zhenjin had always encouraged others. This was determination and optimism. Zhenjin had promised that he would do his best to save everyone. Although there were only 5 of them left in the entire exploration team, this could not be blamed on Zhenjin. He had already done all he could, and he had always fulfilled his promise. This was keeping his word. And what made Lan Zhao feel the most ashamed and admirable was the experience he had heard from Tsang Su and ZD. Zhenjin had been in the volcanic cave, and at the most dangerous moment, even when Tsang Su had taken the initiative to sacrifice himself, Zhenjin had still adhered to the spirit of a knight and had not treated others as food. This was such a noble character. No one knew better than Lan Zhao how noble, rare, and praiseworthy this kind of spirit and virtue was to persevere in the face of death. After leaving the volcanic area, in a situation where they had experienced a battle, their stomachs were rumbling with hunger, and in a situation where they were extremely short of food, Zhenjin had still given the remaining lizard and jumping rat meat to Tsang Su and ZD. This was compassion for the weak and sacrificing himself for others. And what moved Lan Zhao the most was that even after knowing his crime, Zhenjin still took pity on him and did not abandon him. In the end, Lan Zhao decided to live on. Although Zhenjin had not said any comforting words to Lan Zhao firmly believed that the Lord Zhenjin understood him. Looking at the young knight in front of him, looking at his handsome face, looking at his blonde hair, and looking at his elegant and calm smile, the silent Lan Zhao's eyes gradually moistened. What he saw was not Zhenjin, nor was it a temple knight. It was as if he was looking at the sun. In his eyes, in his heart, Zhenjin seemed to be emitting light all the time. This light was not because of Zhenjin's identity as a temple knight, nor was it because of his identity as the sole successor of the 100 Needles clan. It was not a reflection of external sunlight, but rather it was because of his moral character and spirit. He stood there, looking ordinary, but he was a flag that belonged to the knights. This made Lan Zhao want to follow this flag from the bottom of his heart. These days, when night fell, when Lan Zhao rested and faced himself alone, he was also recalling and imagining. At that time, when we found Zidi, Song Su, and the others trapped at the top of the sand dune, surrounded by lizards, my brother and I would have disregarded our own safety and gone to rescue them. Then, we would have met up with the Lord Jinjin. In that case, wouldn't the current situation be different? But at that time, I listened to my brother's words and did not choose to rescue them. Was this a punishment and warning from God, or was this a punishment given to us brothers by fate? Lord Jinjin, you even saved such a sinful person like me, and did not give up. From now on, I will use all of my strength to follow you, until death do us part. You once saved my brother, but when your fiancé was in danger, Huang Zhao and I both chose to escape and give up. From now on, I will use my life to atone for this choice. Following a person like you, is it possible that perhaps it can make my darkness fade away? Can it reduce my sins? Just like how the sunlight can melt away all darkness. After coming out of the oasis, Lan Zhao was silent, and no one knew what he was thinking. He had once demoted himself to a slave and declared his loyalty to Jinjin. But that was only because Huang Zhao had offended someone as important as Jinjin. For the sake of his brother, Lan Zhao had no choice but to do so. But now, Lan Zhao's silent loyalty was of a completely different nature. This kind of loyalty, because of Jin Pin's noble status, was very little. More importantly, it was because of Zhen Jin's understanding of Lan Zhao that the latter approved of, and Zhen Jin's great kindness in saving Lan Zhao's life and soul. In addition, there was also Lan Zhao's own remorse and guilt towards himself, his attempt to redeem himself, and the motivation to do good that came from the depths of human nature. Lan Zhao looked at Zhen Jin expressionlessly, but the emotions in his heart were extremely complex. As his heart surged, his eyes gradually turned red, and his vision became more and more blurry. Zhen Jin looked at Baya, Didi, Song Su, and Lan Zhao, and felt his scalp go numb. These people were all looking at him, and their eyes were full of eagerness, worship, love, tenderness, loyalty, appreciation, and so on. The young knight couldn't take it anymore. What made him feel even more frightened was that Lan Zhao was about to cry on the spot. What does he mean by this? I just told a small lie to pave the way for the future, to hide the core of my heart. Everyone's reaction was stronger than expected, and Zhen Jin felt that he gradually couldn't take it anymore. He quickly shook his head. You think too highly of me. Well, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's continue. Zhen Jin turned around and continued to lead the way. Others didn't know, but how could Zhen Jin not know himself? He knew that his ability was actually very limited. He also knew that although he looked very determined on the outside, he was also very hesitant, confused, and worried deep down. He yearned for bravery, but he was also afraid of death. He was a noble, a knight, but at the same time, he was also a normal person. Yes, I almost forgot. Lord Jinjin still has the quality of humility. Lan Zhao's eyes lit up again. It's hard to imagine that a person of his age, with such achievements, can still maintain a humble and cautious state of mind. This is definitely not an act. I'm sure that this humility comes from the bottom of his heart. I really want to know immediately what great achievements Lord Jinjin will achieve in the future. Lan Zhao looked at Zhen Jin's back, and his heart was filled with emotion and endless praise. Chapter 84. The forest was quiet at night. Occasionally, there would be the roars of unknown beasts or the chirping of nightingales. Through the gaps in the leaves, one could see the bright moon hanging in the night sky. 3 hammocks had already been built. When they were in the oasis, Zhen Jin had mutated into the spear scorpion leader and hunted a large number of acid green lizards. With the stomach pouches of these green lizards as water bags, Song Su and the others focused their labor on making hemp rope and coarse cloth. They first made hemp rope of varying thickness, then used the thinnest hemp rope to weave the simplest coarse cloth. Using these coarse cloth and hemp rope, they made hammocks. Because there were fewer resources in the oasis and a lot of labor, in the end, Jean and the others only made 3 hammocks. However, although there were 5 of them, they did not need that many. Every night, at least 2 people were arranged to keep watch. There were 5 people in the small group, so there were only 3 left to enjoy the 3 hammocks. Due to the shortage of resources, the 3 hammocks were the precious collective property of this small group. In the middle of the 3 hammocks, there was a burning bonfire. Without the influence of the wind, the bonfire emitted an orange light, occasionally making crackling sounds and sparks. Jean had already checked the surroundings carefully, and there were no signs of poisonous fire bees. Jean had almost lost his life because of the poisonous fire bees, so naturally, he was very concerned about this. However, in reality, even if ZD had informed Jean of the existence of the poisonous fire bees in time, Jean, who had just woken up, would not have had the ability to check the surroundings. Speaking of which, Sang-Soo and Lan Zeo's exploration team did not know about the poisonous fire bees before they met Jean. They had repeatedly started fires in the forest, but they had not been attacked by the poisonous fire bees. They had just eaten dinner, and the 5 of them were very satisfied. At the moment, the group had sufficient food reserves. Even after leaving the oasis, the 5 of them rarely replenished their food and water along the way. They had made a lot of preparations in the oasis. In the forest area, the resources were much more abundant than in the desert, and the worries about food and water in everyone's hearts decreased. Sang-Soo stared at the map in his hand by the bonfire. He was old and his eyesight had deteriorated. He held the sheepskin map in one hand and the lens in the other. He held it close to his eyes. Sometimes, he would look away from the map and mumble to himself, as if he was calculating something. His hands also cooperated, drawing crisscrossing lines on the grass. Sometimes, he would take out a charcoal pencil and carefully add a few black lines on the sheepskin map. The charcoal pencil he used was made from wood that had been charred black at one end and then sharpened. After studying for a while, Sang-Soo raised his head and laughed. He reported to Jean, "Lord Jean, our progress is very fast. According to my estimation, as long as we continue walking, we will reach the place where we entered the forest in 1 or 2 days." This was mainly because of Jean's protection. The speed of the whole group's progress was much faster than Sang-Soo's expectations. "I have some bad news. We don't have much pink medicine on hand," ZD said after hearing Sang-Soo's words while grinding the materials. The materials she was grinding were all collected during the day along the way. They included the feathers and blood of the iron-feathered bird, the green-spotted moss that poisoned Baya, and so on. The resources in the forest were abundant and were not comparable to those in the desert. However, the main material to make the pink medicine was a kind of ore that glowed with heat. This ore was also the food of the monkey-tailed brown bear. ZD did not collect this material. The exploration team needed this pink medicine to mark along the way. By doing so, not only could they prevent people from getting lost in the forest, but it could also serve as a signal for help sometimes. "How long can it last?" Jean asked. ZD had already calculated and answered directly. "According to the most economical method, it can last for 3 more days." Jean nodded slightly. After thinking for a while, he replied, "There's enough time. There's no need to deliberately search for ores. Our first goal is to rush back to our original location." No one had any objections. After this series of events, Jean had supreme authority and influence in this 5-man team. After discussing for a while, Sang-Soo, ZD, and Baya all lay on the hammocks to sleep. Tonight, Jean and Lan Zeo were responsible for keeping watch at the same time. In the desert, 2 people took turns keeping watch at night. One was responsible for the first half of the night, and the other for the second half. However, in the forest, because the trees were overgrown and blocked their vision, it was adjusted to 2 people keeping watch at the same time. The night was getting darker. The forest seemed to be deeper and more terrifying. Predators often moved out at night. This made the danger level of the forest at night far higher than during the day. Lon Zao's face was full of vigilance. He would react at the slightest movement. Baya and Lon Zao's recovery, in addition, greatly reduced Zhen Jin's burden. Zhen Jin felt energized. Although he had been leading the way all day, he was still responsible for keeping watch at night. This wasn't because his endurance had increased, but because the green lizard's eyes were too useful. Almost all the hidden threats in the forest had nowhere to hide in front of Zhen Jin. In terms of practical value, the green lizard's eyes are definitely number one. Zhen Jin felt deeply. If he didn't have the green lizard's eyes, the young knight could only move forward step by step and slowly explore. His mind was always tense, and he was passively on guard against any sneak attack from any direction. With the green lizard's eyes, Zhen Jin could detect danger in advance. He could take the initiative to control the situation and allocate his physical strength and energy. There was a huge difference between a person's physical strength and energy consumption in a passive and active state. This was a qualitative change. Squeak, squeak. Suddenly, the sound of an animal being attacked could be heard from the forest not far away. Lon Zao was shocked. His hand, which was always on the hilt of his sword, immediately clenched tightly. But in the next moment, the squeak squeak stopped abruptly and didn't appear again. Lon Zao frowned, his expression serious. Without a specific bloodline, Lon Zao didn't have the ability to see in the dark, even though he was a bronze-ranked elite. He could only rely on the weak light of the fire to identify his surroundings. He could only see a ball of darkness a little further away. He couldn't tell if there was nothing in the darkness, or if there were wolves or poisonous snakes lurking in the dark. In the dark forest, scenes of survival, hunting, and escape were ongoing. The light of the temporary campsite drove away many wild beasts, but it also seemed to attract some existences. There seemed to be something in the darkness of the forest that was getting more and more restless. Sometimes it was the sound of branches being crushed. Sometimes it was a mysterious high-pitched cry. Lon Zao gradually became nervous. He felt as if something was slowly and quietly approaching the campsite. "I'll go check it out. If something happens, you have to shout immediately." Zhen Jin opened his mouth and instructed Lon Zao. "Yes, master." Lon Zao immediately responded. Zhen Jin entered the darkness and quickly disappeared from Lon Zao's sight. He didn't have the ability to see in the dark, so he activated his heart core at this time. His field of vision suddenly changed. The basic color of the forest at night was darker. There was no wind, and the creatures that could move emitted light red, orange, fluorescent green, and other colors. It was more conspicuous than during the day. During the day, Zhen Jin needed human eyes and lizard eyes to match. But at night, in the pitch-black forest, human eyes were practically useless. Both of his eyes mutated into the pupils of a lizard. Zhen Jin first patrolled around the campsite a few times, accurately killing a few wild beasts and temporarily eliminating the threats around the campsite. Then, he chose a direction and went deep into the forest. After he was a certain distance away from the temporary campsite, Zhen Jin slowly stopped his footsteps and began to take off his clothes. He stripped himself naked, then climbed up a tree and carefully placed his clothes in the treetops. Then, he firmly memorized this position. If he forgot, he could only return to the temporary campsite naked. If ZD and Song Su found out in this state, it would be very awkward. Zhen Jin went to the surface naked and walked a few dozen steps. After he observed his surroundings and confirmed that there was no one else, he began to activate his heart core. Mysterious and strange blood-red magic energy surged out of the heart core and quickly covered Zhen Jin's entire body. In a ball of red light, Zhen Jin's human form collapsed like snow under the sun and turned into a lizard. The red light quickly dissipated. Zhen Jin had disappeared from his original position and was replaced by an acid green lizard. This acid green lizard had strong limbs, a long tail, and green scales all over its body. Zhen Jin observed himself. In the green lizard's vision, he could only see a blurry light green outline of himself. My vision is lower, but it's much higher than the spear scorpion. Zhenjin tried to sniff the air and immediately realized that a lizard's sense of smell was far more sensitive than a human's. There seems to be the smell of water in the air. He opened his mouth slightly and spat out a huge purple-black snake tongue, successfully making a hissing sound. Zhenjin moved his front and back legs, controlling the strong lizard body and walking in the dark forest. Zhenjin walked smoothly. Because the green lizard had 4 legs, it felt very similar to a human crawling on all 4s. Another reason was that this was not the first time Zhenjin had tried to completely transform into a green lizard. Back in the desert, he had done it many times when he was on night watch alone. But there are still many differences between this and crawling on all 4s. Zhenjin stopped and silently summarized his experience. He turned his head and looked behind him. The biggest difference was behind him, the thick lizard tail. When he transformed into the leader of the spear scorpion, the tail was long and thin, so it did not affect Zhenjin much. But when he transformed into a lizard, the lizard tail was thick, heavy, and long. It dragged on the ground and became a hindrance. Especially when Zhenjin moved forward on all 4s, the lizard tail would sway slightly from side to side. This sway affected Zhenjin's balance. The faster Zhenjin moved forward, the greater the effect. When the acid green lizard runs, not only do its limbs, torso, and tail work together. Whether it's walking or running, it has a perfect movement rhythm. It's a completely natural rhythm. Lizard larvae that just came out of their eggshells may be very clumsy. But as time passes and they gradually grow up, after experiencing the training of hunting, running away, playing, and other activities, they will naturally master this movement rhythm. But I don't. I'm like a newborn lizard. I've just been born, but I have the body of a mature lizard. Even though I've used the time at night to train many times, I still haven't mastered the correct way to run. Zhenjin felt that his tail was a hindrance, but there was nothing he could do. Just like how he had secretly practiced the spear scorpion form, it was still difficult for him to turn at high speed. He was a human after all, and the time he spent in the form of a magical beast was too short. There's water here. Zhenjin followed the smell of water and found a small pool. As long as I have enough training, I will definitely be able to master the acid green lizard form at some point in the future. Zhenjin encouraged himself in his heart and began to train his tail near the pool. He first swung the thick tail behind him, making the sound of the wind. Then, he began to charge towards a large tree. After brushing past the tree, he swung his tail hard and hit the tree trunk. The tree trunk swayed slightly, and the dense branches swayed even more. The leaves rustled, but not a single leaf fell. Asterisk pa pa pa. Asterisk in a series of sounds. Zhenjin used the trees to train his tail. After training for a while, he began to change the way he attacked. He first charged towards a tree, then exerted force on his limbs and changed direction abruptly. Using the inertia of his body, he swung his tail onto the tree trunk. Asterisk pa. Asterisk the tree trunk swayed, and large pieces of bark fell off. The branches rustled as if a strong wind was coming. This attack method was much more ferocious than before. With this kind of attack power, even if it's a charging ranger, I'll be able to send him flying off his horse. That's not right. The lizard's limbs are thick and short. I can't reach the ranger on the horse. Maybe I can try. The moment I swing my tail to attack, I push off the ground with my hind legs and raise my entire body, forming a posture with my head lowered and my tail high. This way, my tail can hit a higher place. Zhenjin thought of this and began to try. In the end, he didn't control his strength on the first try. When he swung his tail, his hind legs used too much force and lifted his entire body up. The lizard's back was on the ground. On the second try, he adjusted his strength incorrectly. The upward force was reduced, but the forward force was increased, causing him to plunge into the mud. It was very similar to the posture of a dog falling on its face. Zhenjin supported himself on the ground with his 4 legs, spat out mud from his mouth, and then blew air out from his nose. After shaking his head for a while, he finally cleaned up his nasal cavity and mouth. The two failures didn't discourage him. Instead, it increased his motivation to continue trying. After a few more tries, Zhang Jin's movements became more and more proficient. But after some thought, he stopped this training program. Although I can hit a higher target, the lower half of my body is in the air, causing the strength of my tail to be much weaker than when I'm on the ground. And the lower half of my body is in the air, giving me a short time to stay in the air. This is too big of a flaw. Zhang Jin was familiar with the way the knights fought. He quickly simulated a scene in his mind. A ranger rushed over. He transformed into a green lizard and rushed forward. When he was close, he suddenly turned his body and swung his tail. The lower half of his body was raised, and his tail was swung towards the ranger. But at the same time, the ranger thrust his spear forward, aiming at the green lizard's butt. Zhang Jin thought of this and didn't want to simulate anymore. Adjusting the way of the tail swing attack, just now, Zhang Jin immerses himself in practicing hard. Hiss until Zhang Jin opened his mouth and sucked in a breath of cold air. I think I twisted my tail. A strong pain came from his tail. When he swung his tail slightly, the pain was like a whip full of iron thorns, whipping Zhang Jin's head. In this situation, Zhang Jin could only stop training his tail and start the next training. He squatted on the ground and raised his neck. His Adam's apple suddenly swelled, forming a round lump. The round lump rolled from his neck to his mouth. Zhang Jin opened his mouth wide. Then, in the next moment, a ball of green acid shot out from his mouth. The acid hit a tree unerringly. The thick tree trunk was corroded by the acid, making sizzling sounds and emitting pungent smoke. After a few breaths, a large hole was corroded in the trunk. It could no longer support the lush upper half. With a creak, the tree fell to the ground, making a loud noise. Zhang Jin took a few steps back and continuously shot at the surrounding trees. Almost all of the liquid he shot out hit their targets accurately. Only one of them brushed past the tree bark and landed on a rock. After a few breaths, the affected trees fell to the ground. For a moment, the sound of explosions was continuous. The unfortunate rock, although not small, also turned into nothingness. This was normal. The lizard's acid could even corrode gold stone, let alone this kind of ordinary rock. If it was a silver-ranked green lizard's acid, even a black iron-ranked spear scorpion would die instantly. Only a silver-ranked spear scorpion could resist it. After shooting so many times in a row, Zhang Jin also felt weak. His head drooped, and his spirit was somewhat dispirited. Shooting acid was not the green lizard's usual way of fighting. It was the green lizard's biggest trump card. The green lizard would not use this trump card unless it had no other choice. For Zhang Jin, this long-range weapon was the most suitable for him. Because he also had the accuracy talent from the 100 Needles clan. Although he had not practiced much, Zhang Jin's acid was much more powerful than the green lizard's. He would shoot wherever he wanted and almost never missed. After panting for a while, Zhang Jin gradually regained some strength. His whole body conveyed a sense of weakness. His strong limbs felt soft, and the lizard's body became heavy. At the same time, Zhang Jin also felt his mouth dry. His body was dehydrated. The green lizard's body contained a lot of water, which was why it could produce corrosive acid. This also meant that after shooting the acid, the green lizard would enter a dehydrated state. Now, even if Zhang Jin wanted to shoot acid, he could not shoot it out for the time being. Because of the lack of water in his body, the speed of producing acid had dropped to the bottom. Zhang Jin moved his forelimbs and came to the side of the pool. The pool was not deep, and the green lizard did not see any creatures in the water. However, to be cautious, Zhang Jin did not take the opportunity to go into the water and train the green lizard's swimming ability. Zhang Jin first stretched out his snake tongue and licked the water a few times. When he found that there was no problem, he lowered his head and gulped down the water. A large amount of water flowed into his stomach, and then under Zhang Jin's deliberate control, It was stored in the other 3 stomach bags. This really quenches my thirst. Zhenjin sighed and began to actively control his internal organs, trying to speed up the production of acid. The water stored in his stomach was squeezed out and flowed into the poison sac below his neck, where it began to turn into acid. At this speed, I'll have a full bag of acid after about night. Like before, it won't be a problem to shoot more than 20 times. Zhenjin had already discovered that when he mutated from human form into a complete green lizard, the acid reserve in the poison sac was only half. After a few training sessions, he also discovered the technique of shooting acid. Under normal circumstances, the green lizard would shoot its poison out fiercely, but it would often miss. At most, it could shoot 2 or 3 times. However, Zhenjin only shot out a small amount each time. He deliberately controlled the muscles around him. This way, the number of shots would be greatly increased. Zhenjin lowered his head again and opened his mouth to suck water. This time, his absorption of water was different from before. He was controlling different organ tissues and different muscle groups. This time, the pool water directly entered his poison sac and did not enter his stomach through his esophagus. This was the acid green lizard's ability to absorb poison. After being stung by the fat ball-flying fish, the green lizards could absorb poison from each other to detoxify the poison. Moreover, the poison that was absorbed and stored in the poison sac not only would not harm the other organs in the body, but could also be synthesized with the acid in the lizard's body to produce an even more intense poison. This situation was not rare in the natural world. After the incident, Song Su casually mentioned a kind of desert beetle. This kind of beetle preyed on ants and deliberately collected formic acid. When the beetle encountered its natural enemy, the meerkat, it would spray out the collected formic acid and shoot it in the meerkat's face, causing the meerkat to flee in a sorry state. After lying by the pool for a long time without vigorous activity, Zhenjin felt his body turn cold. The temperature also had a great impact on the lizard's ability to move. This was why the green lizards would rush to the gold stones at dawn every day to use the temperature of the stones to raise their body temperature. After their body temperature rose, they would have more ability to move. Tonight's training is almost over. Zhenjin finally came to the side of the big trees. Most of the big trees that had fallen to the ground had been corroded, but there were still some treetops and branches left. The corrosive ability of the acid had obviously weakened. After all, under the deliberate control of the needle, the number of consecutive shots competed, but the amount of acid shot out was limited. Although these trees would definitely be completely corroded, Zhenjin could not wait any longer. He touched the surface of the tree trunk with his right forefoot and activated his heart core. Red light shone, and the red line wrapped around the tree trunk and retracted almost instantly, leaving only some charcoal ash on the ground. Even if the trees were ordinary, they were still living beings. As long as they were living beings, they could be absorbed by the blood core. But there was very little magic energy that could be transformed. After getting rid of all the tree remains, Zhenjin's heart core did not have the option to become a tree. The acid destroyed the life essence of the trees, so the bloodline absorbed very little. If I directly absorb a large number of trees, I should be able to transform into a tree in the end. It was about time. Zhenjin returned to the distance, transformed into his human form, climbed up the treetops, found his clothes, and put them on. It was worth mentioning that the hole in the back of his pants had been patched up. ZD had accidentally found it, and secretly found Zhenjin to patch it up for him. Back at the temporary camp. "Master, you're back." When Lan Zhao saw Zhenjin, his furrowed brows immediately relaxed, and his eyes revealed obvious admiration. Not long after Zhenjin left, he heard a rumble, like the sound of trees falling. Master must have caught some ferocious beasts and fought with them. With such a violent commotion, the ferocious beasts lurking in the darkness must be very scary. But now Master is back, and he is unharmed. Even his clothes are not damaged at all, nor is there a trace of blood. Amazing, as expected of someone who has mastered the power of the soul. Even the pitch-black darkness cannot stop Master's footsteps. On this strange island, Master can only rely on the strength of his physical body. If he can really use his fighting aura, what would it be like? Lan Zhao stared at Jinjin without blinking, and his gaze became more and more fervent. Jinjin coughed. Is there a situation on your side? With Master's help, the camp is very safe. Lan Zhao immediately replied. Jinjin nodded, a little unable to stand Lan Zhao's gaze. You stay here and continue patrolling. I'll go take a look at the other side. Yes, Master, Lan Zhao immediately replied. His gaze followed Jinjin's back until Jinjin was blocked by the trees. Master went through a fierce battle, but he is still calm and collected. This is the demeanor of a strong person. Or rather, the battle in the darkness just now was just for him to stretch his muscles and bones. Lan Zhao praised in his heart. Chapter 85. The chirping of birds echoed in the forest in the early morning. As Jinjin and the others approached, a flock of birds flapped their wings and flew out of the branches in a panic. Perhaps it was because it was close to the desert, but there was no morning fog here. The sun shone in the green forest, and the air was filled with a fresh smell. Jinjin was still leading the way. Although nothing could be seen from the outside, Jinjin's tailbone and buttocks were still a little numb and sore. His body was very healthy. The injuries he suffered in the desert had already healed before entering the forest. As for Baya, who was an ordinary person, his broken bones had just recovered slightly. So far, he cannot draw a bow. Seems like yesterday's training was a little heavy. Jinjin pondered. He knew that this numbness and soreness was caused by last night's tail-swinging training. After Jinjin returned to his human form, although he did not have a tail, the injuries he suffered in his lizard form would still remain on his body in a similar form. Just like when he was injured in his human form, his injuries would not heal instantly because he transformed into other life forms. Using my tail to hit trees and rocks won't hurt me. After all, I transformed into a black iron-level lizard. Looks like I have a problem with the way the lizard tail exerts force. I hurt myself when I was practicing tail swinging. If I didn't have a strong recovery ability, I'm afraid my walking posture would be out of shape. Jinjin sighed secretly. After entering the forest, it was not convenient for him to practice in the middle of the night. Previously in the desert, the exploration team had arranged for one person to keep watch at night. Now that two people were keeping watch at night, Jinjin could not leave the vicinity of the camp for too long. If it was too long, it would make the other companions worry and search for him, causing even more trouble. Jinjin could transform into a spear scorpion and a complete fat ball flying fish. However, last night, he only had time to train the green lizard form. He did not have the time to train the other two forms at all. I'm already familiar with the spear scorpion form. As for the fat ball flying fish, Jinjin had secretly transformed in the desert long ago and realized that this form was not practical. The fat ball flying fish's strongest attack was to shoot out pitch-black venomous fish bones. However, the prerequisite for such an attack was for the fat ball flying fish to self-destruct. This was a method of mutual destruction. Sometimes, the fat ball flying fish died so suddenly that it didn't even have time to self-destruct. If Jinjin wanted to use this method, it would undoubtedly be suicide. Other than that, the fat ball flying fish could turn invisible. However, after Jinjin mutated, he discovered that although the human eye could not see this kind of invisibility, when the fat ball flying fish floated forward, it would open its mouth and croak. If Jinjin shut his mouth and stopped croaking, he would not be able to exchange air with the outside world and would not be able to float quickly in the air. The croaking sound reduced the value of invisibility to a large extent. Therefore, after knowing this, Jinjin was not too willing to train his fat ball flying fish form. He had thought about it and felt that the most practical form was still the green lizard form. The green lizard's eyes were a great help to him. As for the green lizard's acid spray, it could be said that it was the most powerful long-range attack that Kingpin had mastered. The acid spray was much more powerful than the wooden darts, and the range was not much different. Zhun Jin was especially good at accuracy, and the combination of the two was very powerful. The green lizard form was only at the black iron level, and this was actually an advantage. The silver level spear scorpion form would greatly consume the magic energy in the heart core. In comparison, the black iron green lizard used much less magic energy. This would give Zhun Jin more time to fight and practice this form. The black iron green lizard was a regular combat method, and the silver spear scorpion was a trump card that would only be used when facing a strong enemy. This was Zhun Jin's plan. He didn't originally think this way. After he could truly control the heart core, he felt more fear, caution, and vigilance towards the heart core than curiosity, exploration, and surprise. He originally did not plan to use the heart core frequently, but after being chased by the fat ball flying fish in the oasis, Zhun Jin's thoughts changed. If I didn't have the green lizard's eyes, I wouldn't have been able to discover the fat ball flying fish. If I'm in danger, ZD, Song Su, and the others won't be able to survive either. On this island, anything can happen, and danger could arrive at any moment. I clearly have the heart core that can absorb the blood and master some ability to deal with this kind of danger. But because I was cautious and prepared in advance, when the danger comes, I can only wait for death. If this is the result, wouldn't I be too pedantic? With these thoughts in mind, Zhun Jin gritted his teeth and decided to use the heart core to prepare as much as possible for himself and for ZD and the others. It was better to be prepared for a rainy day. The complete form of the fat ball flying fish was the result of this idea. When they were in the oasis, Needle Gold secretly killed many fat ball flying fish behind the others' backs. Then he collected the complete bloodline and could become a flying fish of the black iron level. Wait a moment. Zhun Jin, who was moving forward, suddenly saw something strange and immediately stopped. Everyone immediately tensed up. Ever since they entered the forest, Zhun Jin had never taken the initiative to stop. Could it be that he sensed a huge threat lurking nearby? Zhun Jin slowly walked to the left, and after a dozen steps, he stopped under a tree. He reached out to touch the bark, and a small piece of it was missing, as if it was caused by a sharp weapon. Zhun Jin looked around, and quickly found more small traces. Then, his gaze paused, as if he had found something. He went deep into the dense grass, and bent down to pick up a piece of silver armor. The others walked over, and Song Su saw the armor piece in Zhun Jin's hand, and said in surprise, "This is part of the armor. The material is very high quality, it's top-grade steel." Zhun Jin nodded slightly, and continued to search the surroundings. Footprints of different depths, bloodstains, fallen trees, and the exposed ground after the grass was completely removed. Zhun Jin found more and more traces, but he could not simulate a battle scene. There must have been a fierce battle here. The surviving party purposely cleaned the battlefield, so I can't make more judgments. ZD blinked her beautiful eyes. So, there are people around here. Baya, on the other hand, asked, "What are they fighting against?" Zhun Jin frowned, and his tone was not very sure. It seemed to be a giant beast, bigger than a violent horse, and very heavy. Its main attack method seemed to be head-butting. It should be the crowd that won. Magical beasts would not purposely clean the battlefield. Zhun Jin made a judgment, but it was a little difficult. "Are you sure it was a human?" ZD asked. Zhun Jin shook his head. "I can only judge that it was a humanoid form, but since it could clean the battlefield and do it so well, it means that they must have high intelligence. After a fierce battle, they still had the strength to clean up the traces, which means that they were not weak." Song Su squatted on the ground and touched the footprints with his finger. "This battle happened a few days ago. What I am more concerned about is, why did they clean the battlefield and clean up the traces?" Song Su's question was also what Zhun Jin was worried about. Zhun Jin and the others were attacked by magical beasts, and they rarely cleaned the battlefield. At most, they cleaned up the bloodstains to prevent the smell of blood from attracting other predators. But this group of people not only cleaned the battlefield, but also did it very carefully. This did not make sense. Using this kind of effort to clean up the battlefield was not worth the loss. because people would waste a lot of time and stamina, and in the process of surviving on an isolated island, every resource and every bit of stamina needed to be saved. Even if these traces were left, the predators in the forest would have low intelligence and would not benefit from the traces of the battlefield. But this group of people did it. What do they need to guard against? Who were they? Were they the crew of the Pig's Kiss, or the people on this island? Jinjin looked into the distance, and because he was thinking, his eyes were a little absent-minded. An unexpected situation appeared. Now, there were two choices in front of him. The first choice was to follow their original plan and rush to the place where Tsang Su and the others entered the forest. This way, they could verify and fill in the map. The second choice was to give up on this plan and follow these traces to approach this mysterious group that suddenly appeared. There were many risks in this. The combat power of this mysterious group was unknown, but it should not be low. Their numbers were unknown, their race was unknown, and their intentions were unknown. Everyone was silent. Some continued to observe the traces, while others were vigilant of their surroundings. They were all waiting for Zhun Jin's decision. Without spending too much time thinking, Zhun Jin quickly made a decision. Give up on the previous plan. We will follow these traces. Be careful. Understood. Bai replied. Yes, master. Lan Zhao said concisely. Song Su and ZD both nodded, and no one raised any objections. The five-man exploration team changed their direction and no longer walked along the boundary between the forest and the desert, but officially went deep into the forest. 2 hours later, a river appeared in front of everyone. Jinjin looked at the gurgling river and could not help but sigh. At this point, all the clues were lost. He originally followed the traces, but the group was cleaning up the traces along the way. They were experienced and ruthless. A few days later, Zhun Jin tried his best and could barely identify their previous route. But when they reached the river, the traces left by the mysterious group completely disappeared due to the current. The river flows very slowly, and the riverbed is very low, only reaching the knees of an adult. They stepped into the river here, but they did not directly go to the other side. We don't know if they will follow the river or go against the current to land somewhere. However, this also means that this river is not very dangerous. Zhun Jin squinted his eyes and mutated the eyes of a lizard. He found that there was almost no life in the river, at most some small fish and shrimps. Let's continue forward. Zhun Jin thought for a while, then led the team across the river to the other side. There were no traces to follow, so Zhun Jin followed the direction that Song Su estimated. Their destination was the beach where the Pig's Kiss was stranded. About a quarter of an hour later, Jin Zhun was the first to hear the noisy and harsh sounds. As the distance shortened, the five of them found a camp in the forest. The camp was surrounded by a row of wooden stakes. The area of the camp was not large, but there was a wooden house in the middle. There were 2 arrow towers in the camp. One was already built, and the other was just beginning to take shape. A group of beasts was wreaking havoc in the camp, and the people in the camp had all retreated to the wooden house in the middle. The situation was not good. Chapter 86. What are these things? I don't know. It's my first time seeing them, too. Zhun Jin and the rest squatted, using the tall trees as cover, looking at the wild beasts wreaking havoc in the camp from afar. These wild beasts were not big, similar to monkeys. They had purplish-black fur all over their bodies, 2 small black horns on their foreheads, and a pair of broad bat wings on their backs. Their claws were very sharp, and when they screamed, their mouths were wide open, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. Some of them flew in the air, sometimes diving down and slamming into the wooden huts. Some of them bounced on the ground and the buildings of the camp, and after landing on the ground, they jumped away, kicking up a cloud of mud and grass. Song Su observed for a moment, then shook his head with a bitter smile. Their horns remind me of demons, but I'm sure that these are not any kind of demons. They look like monkeys, but they have bat wings, so let's call them bat monkeys for now. Jin Jin and the rest frowned. The bat monkey screams were very sharp and ear-piercing. Previously, the ear-piercing noises that Jinjin had heard were made by these bat monkeys. There was no lack of bronze-ranked and iron-ranked bat monkeys, but the bat monkeys were flying in the air and did not participate in the attack. It was mainly the ordinary bat monkeys that surrounded the wooden hut in the middle of the camp, scratching and clawing outside, trying to find an opening. The doors and windows of the wooden hut were tightly shut. There was a large chimney in the wooden hut, and at this moment, thick smoke was constantly coming out. If the ordinary bat monkeys tried to enter, they would immediately be choked by the smoke and run away. The bat monkeys' attack did not make much progress. What exactly is in the wooden hut? The clean battlefield that we saw before. Could it be this group of people? Jinjin guessed. He did not rush to rescue them. Firstly, it was difficult to distinguish between friend and foe, and he did not know if the people in the wooden hut were friend or foe. Secondly, the situation in the camp was still in a deadlock, and there was no need to act immediately. Thirdly, there were many bat monkeys, and they were constantly jumping and flying, agile and fierce. If they acted and provoked these bat monkeys, Song Su and the rest would be in trouble. The exploration team had a total of 5 people, other than Jinjin. Only Lan Zhao could fend off a few bat monkeys. Once Bai Ye and the others were besieged, they would definitely be torn to pieces by these bat monkeys. "Sir, I think I was the one who built this camp." At this moment, ZD said something surprising. "You've been here before?" Jinjin was stunned. ZD shook her head. "I led the others deep into the rainforest and found Sir. His Excellency was unconscious and could not be awakened. I decided to set up camp nearby. I plan to recuperate on the spot and heal my lord as soon as possible." At this point, ZD looked at the campsite again and nodded. "That's right. I was very impressed with the hut and the camp. For the sake of my lord's safety and for the convenience of future treatment, I wanted to be stationed here for a period of time. Therefore, it took a lot of time to build the wooden house. It is very sturdy." Baya was stunned. "Then how did this camp end up here?" "Ah, I know, it's teleportation." It was as if Jinjin and the others, along with their camp, had been teleported to the desert. This camp, abandoned by ZD, was also affected by the teleportation and went from the rainforest to the forest. Then, it was occupied by another mysterious group. They repaired ZD's original base and expanded it to build a bigger camp. Baya looked over and nodded. "Sir, ZD is right. I also found that the wood used in the hut is different from the wood used in the arrow tower. I am familiar with the wood used in the arrow tower. It is the wood of the forest." Song Su was puzzled. "Strange. Sir ZD built the camp before the teleportation. Now that we know about the teleportation, how could the group in the hut not know? Have they not experienced the teleportation? Or are they not worried about the teleportation? If they were not worried about the teleportation, it meant that this group belonged to the camp of the Sea Island Master. Coming into contact with this group of people was very risky." Jinjin thought for a moment. "The situation is unclear, so we can't act rashly. Let's retreat to a safe distance first. Then let me secretly capture a bat monkey. Study this kind of beast carefully. Maybe ZD can concoct a targeted medicine. I will do my best." ZD nodded. Just as she finished speaking, a window in the wooden house was suddenly pushed open. A middle-aged man with a yellow face raised a strange crossbow. He stood in the house and shouted, "Go to hell, you bastards!" As he spoke, his left hand grabbed the bottom of the crossbow, and his right hand grabbed the raised trigger at the back of the crossbow. He pressed down on the trigger, and a short arrow shot out. He raised the trigger, and the crossbow was loaded. He pressed down again, and a second short arrow flew out. In this way, the yellow-faced man kept pressing down on the trigger. In a short period of time, he shot out more than 10 arrows. "There are people in the hut." Baya saw this scene and exclaimed in a low voice, "Are they people from a pig's kiss?" Jinjin immediately asked. Everyone shook their heads. It could be, but it could also be not. The pig's kiss was a large ship that could cross the ocean and connect the 2 continents. There were many people on the pig's kiss, and it was very messy. Song Su, ZD, and the others could not recognize everyone. They have crossbows in their hands. What kind of crossbow is that to be able to shoot continuously? ZD frowned. Zhenjin's face was serious. The crossbow is good, but the person shooting the arrows is too bad. He does not have any aim and is only shooting randomly. This is bad. The yellow-faced man was very aggressive, shooting randomly, forcing the nearby bat monkeys to retreat. But very quickly, the bat monkeys counterattacked and swarmed forward. The yellow-faced man saw that the situation was not good and quickly pulled out the pole supporting the wooden window, and the heavy window closed with a bang. But in this short period of time, the nimble bat monkeys had already entered the hut. The hut was immediately filled with people screaming and cursing. Should we go save them? Zhenjin gritted his teeth and fell into hesitation. Quick, 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 hide. In the hut, a fatty screamed and wanted to hide under the table. It was very likely that because he was too fat, the two bat monkeys had targeted him at first sight. The bat monkey suddenly jumped off the wall, dodging the attack, and charged at the fatty. Just as the fatty hid under the table, he heard a bang, and the thick wooden table was directly smashed into pieces. The bat monkey paused for a moment and then grabbed at the fatty. The fatty's eyeballs almost fell out. In this moment, he was extremely afraid and did not even have the thought of dodging. His mind was blank, and he directly sat on the ground like a stone statue. At the crucial moment, a guard bravely stepped forward and used the long sword in his hand to push back the bat monkey. But in the next moment, the other bat monkey took the opportunity to fly onto the guard's head. Ah! The guard let out a miserable cry. His eyeballs were directly gouged out by the bat monkey. The intense pain made him crazily swing his sword, and his companions who wanted to help were also forced back by the sword. Taking advantage of this time, the bat monkey opened its mouth and suddenly lowered its head, biting the guard's neck. Poochie! Accompanied by a horrifying sound, the bat monkey fiercely raised its head and bit a large hole in the guard's neck. Blood spurted out like a fountain. The bat monkey flapped its wings, and a strong lift brought its small body directly to the roof. The bat monkey hung upside down on the roof, and a small part of its windpipe was still outside its mouth. The bat monkey sucked the windpipe into its mouth, chewed a few times, and swallowed it. Bastard! The people in the wooden house were furious. Finally, there was something to eat, and the smell of blood and meat stimulated the bat monkey to become even more ferocious. They were very fast, and their movements were unbelievably nimble, turning the entire wooden house upside down. The fatty collapsed on the ground, and seeing that everyone was in a mess, in the blink of an eye, another person had died. He was so scared that he kept shouting, "Save, save me." The yellow-faced man who opened the window had just raised his crossbow when he saw a bat monkey coming at him. He quickly lowered his head, dodging the bat monkey's dive, and rolled 3 times on the ground in a sorry state. The bat monkey missed its target and hit the ground. It landed on all fours, its 4 claws digging into the ground, and quickly stopped. Then it charged at the yellow-faced man again. The yellow-faced man did not have any fighting skills and was about to get up from the ground. Just as the bat monkey was about to pounce on his face, a sharp, thin sword suddenly pierced out from behind the man. The thin sword pierced the bat monkey's face and pierced through its skull. The bat monkey's speed was too fast, and in an instant, it rushed from the tip of the thin sword to the hemispherical gauntlet at the hilt and skewered itself. But the bat monkey was not dead. Under the intense pain, the bat monkey struggled and flapped its wings. The sword-wielding man hurriedly swung his sword, sending the bat monkey flying. The bat monkey landed on the ground and crazily screamed, struggling and biting. After 5 breaths, it collapsed on the ground and did not move anymore. The person holding the sword pulled the yellow-faced man up and was very angry. "Mu Ban, this is all your fault. I told you not to open the window. Isn't it better to wait for Master Shisuo and the others to come back?" Mu Ban coldly snorted and straightened his neck. "I have a treasure in my hands. These bastards will all die." Saying this, he pulled the trigger again and shot out more than 10 arrows. There was only one bat monkey in the wooden house, and the arrows were very powerful, but they did not hit a single one. Instead, someone was shot in the thigh and angrily shouted, "Muban, you shot me." Everyone dodged the arrows. Whoosh! An arrow pierced the ground, and the tail of the arrow trembled. The fatty who was sitting on the ground saw this arrow, and then looked at his crotch, which was less than a finger away from the arrow. When he reacted, the fatty cried out, and his eyes rolled back, and he fainted on the spot. "Muban, quickly stop. Someone come. Quickly stop Muban. He is more dangerous than these monkeys." Everyone roared and pounced at Muban with ferocious expressions. Muban quickly dodged, and in his panic he lost his crossbow. "Kill the monkey! Kill the monkey!" Another person shouted. Just now, the remaining bat monkey had injured another person. Everyone's attention once again focused on the bat monkey, and after a round of pursuit, this bat monkey was also killed by the same thin sword. The one holding the thin sword was a young man. He had black hair, black eyes, and his skin was also dark, and his hair had natural curls. "Well done, Heywan. I didn't expect you to have this kind of skill." Everyone praised in surprise. Heywan lightly snorted, and the thin sword in his hand drew a beautiful sword flower. And just as he was about to put it back into the sheath, he heard a dong, dong, dong sound, as if someone was beating a war drum. "What's that sound?" Everyone listened in confusion, and the sound of the war drum became louder and louder. "Not good." Heywan listened carefully and suddenly realized something and quickly rushed to the left side. In the next moment, a huge rhinoceros broke through the wooden house, and it was extremely savage and ferocious. Those who could not dodge in time were either sent flying or trampled to the ground. The huge rhinoceros did not stop and directly broke through the wooden house, raising a huge cloud of dust. Without the wooden house blocking them, the bat monkeys outside let out excited horns, and one after another, they charged at the people inside. "It's over. I'm going to die." Seeing the bronze and black iron rank bat monkeys charging at him, Heywan fell into despair. Chapter 87. "No, I don't want to die. I don't want to die." Heywan roared in his heart, a strong desire to live filling his chest. He quickly crawled up. Dust billowed around him, blocking half of his vision. His companions' screams and cries for help could be heard. Creak! The roof of the wooden house let out a terrifying sound, and the remaining walls were on the verge of collapsing. "This place is finished. If I stay here, I will definitely die." Heywan clenched his teeth, suddenly turned around, bent his waist, and ran out of the wooden house. A normal bat monkey screamed, pouncing down from above his head. Heywan immediately rolled forward, nimbly dodging the bat monkey's attack. The normal bat monkey did not continue to pester Heywan after its attack missed, and instead rushed into the wooden house. But just as Heywan was about to get up, he saw another bat monkey pouncing towards him. Different from the previous one, this bat monkey was a bronze-ranked magical beast. Heywan was shocked and quickly pulled out his sword. With a clang, the thin sword at his waist was as fast as silver lightning. The action of pulling out the sword was very fast, displaying Heywan's solid swordsmanship. But in such a hurry, Heywan was still unable to aim at the bronze bat monkey's vital points. The sharp sword pierced the bat monkey's chest, but it was stuck between the bat monkey's ribs, unable to pierce any further. The bronze bat monkey was injured, and its ferocious nature erupted, using its bat wings to increase its speed, forcing the thin sword to bend into a U shape, its sharp claws clawing towards Heywan's eyes and nose. Heywan's eyes flashed with a hint of panic and hurriedly flipped backwards. He pressed his back against the ground, raised his right leg, and fiercely kicked at the bronze bat monkey. The bat monkey was kicked by Heywan, but it was not sent flying. Its wings flapped wildly, its four claws dancing in front of Heywan, almost turning into a black shadow. Compared to the bat monkey, Heywan's strength was not enough to chase it away. Heywan felt like he was kicking a crazy horse. He kicked a few times, but his boots were scratched by the bat monkey, and his calves were also scratched by its claws. Hei-Wan was worried that if this continued, he would be surrounded by even more bat monkeys, and could only grit his teeth and shake his hand, giving up on the thin sword. The bronze bat monkey did not expect that the resistance in front of it to disappear, and rushed past Hei-Wan with the thin sword in its chest and crashed into the ground. Black Curl took the opportunity to crawl on all fours and dashed towards the forest outside the camp. But to Hei-Wan's, T Black Curl's heart was filled with coldness as a gust of wind approached from behind. His bloodshot eyes revealed a hint of despair. A small black shadow flew over, brushing past Hei-Wan's shoulder. It looks like a dart. The strong air pressure caused a gust of wind, forcing the bewildered Hei-Wan to squint his eyes. Then, he heard the mournful screams of the bat monkey behind him. To someone, Hei-Wan was overjoyed. He did not dare to look back, and ran with all his might in the direction where the dart came from. The bronze bat monkey seemed to be heavily injured, and did not show any signs of chasing. Hei-Wan ran all the way into the forest, and found a few people standing under a tree. 'Tis not she Su'Aw and the rest. Wait. Hei-Wan's eyes lit up, and when he saw the purple-eyed girl, he could not help but reveal a surprised and happy expression. He blurted out, "'Tis Hei-Wan." At the same time, Zidi saw Hei-Wan's face clearly, and said in a low voice, "'Tis a member of the mercenary group I hired. Lord Jinjin, the people in the wooden house should be from the Pig's Kiss." Zidi said to Jinjin. Jinjin nodded. "I need to save them as soon as possible. You guys stay here." Jinjin quickly moved forward, and in a few breaths' time, he was in front of Hei-Wan. He quickly sized up the dark-skinned youth. "Can you still fight?" Hei-Wan stood in the same place, looking at him blankly, and did not respond for a while. Jinjin secretly shook his head. "'Tis seems like he's lost his courage." Jinjin had seen the scene of Hei-Wan running away. Immediately, the young knight said to Lan Zhao, "Take good care of him. I'll be back soon." "Yes, master," Lan Zhao immediately replied. "Lord Jinjin, you must be careful." Zidi ran a few steps, her hands clasped in front of her chest, her gaze firmly fixed on Jinjin, the worry in her heart overflowing with words. Jinjin nodded to the young girl, and immediately sped up, rushing towards the camp. "Don't!" At this time, Hei-Wan finally reacted and opened his mouth to stop Jinjin. "You're going to die." In the end, he did not say these words, because in the next moment, Hei-Wan saw Jinjin take out wooden darts from his bosom. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Jinjin threw 3 darts in succession, and 3 ordinary bat monkeys fell from the sky. More bat monkeys rushed towards Jinjin. Jinjin's arm trembled, and with a light flick of his wrist, another 3 bat monkeys fell to the ground, unable to fly again. Hei-Wan's Adam's apple bobbed. Jinjin's darts were too accurate, and practically every shot hit the target, without missing a single one. A bronze bat monkey landed on the ground, and used both its hands and feet to attack Jinjin. Its speed was very fast, and what was even more shocking was that it did not attack in a straight line, but instead turned on the ground in a zigzag pattern, attacking Jinjin. What a beast! Hei-Wan felt a chill in his heart. Jinjin's darts were very accurate, and the bat monkey in the air was a live target. But after landing on the ground, the bat monkey could use the ground's reaction force to quickly change directions, increasing the difficulty of Jinjin's aim by several times. Looks like this bat monkey's intelligence is not low. Jinjin slowly stopped in his tracks and did not attempt to throw the darts again. Instead, he quietly waited for the bat monkey to rush over. What is he doing? Hurry up and attack. Hei-Wan almost couldn't help but shout out. In the next moment, Jinjin's right hand reached down and very naturally grabbed the hilt of a thin sword. This thin sword belonged to Hei-Wan, and it was stuck in the body of the bronze bat monkey, so he had no choice but to give it up. The bronze bat monkey crashed into the ground, and with the thin sword, chased after Hei-Wan. Then, it was killed by Jinjin's wooden darts. and this thin sword was stuck in the ground with the tip of the sword pointed downwards. The bronze bat monkey fiercely stomped on the ground, and its small purple-black body was like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, it was less than a foot away from Zhen Jin's face. Zhen Jin already had a sword in his hand. A light sound rang out. The people in the forest only saw a blur in front of their eyes, and then they saw Zhen Jin holding the sword in one hand, holding it horizontally in front of him. The bronze bat monkey's head had been pierced through by the thin sword, and its head hung from the thin sword. It wasn't completely dead and was about to struggle. But at this time, Zhen Jin swung his sword, and the sharp sword flashed in a silver arc in the air. The bronze bat monkey was thrown out, and it fell to the ground. It wanted to get up, but just as it supported its upper body, its remaining strength leaked out, like its brain and blood from the hole in its head. In the next moment, it fell to the ground, and its eyes were wide open. The shock, disbelief, and fear before its death were frozen on its face. Heiwan's breath stopped. He stared at Zhen Jin's back, and also revealed a shocked expression. How can he have such terrifying strength? You can't use battle chi here. Heiwan had fought with the bronze bat monkey before, and he had used all his strength to stab forward, but it had been stuck between the bat monkey's ribs. It was clear that the skull was the hardest of all the bones. Zhen Jin's sword had directly pierced through the bronze bat monkey's skull. This kind of strength was simply inhuman. Heiwan. At this time, ZD, Lan Zhao, and the others walked over. Miss ZD. Heiwan collected his emotions and bowed to ZD. This, sir, is... ZD smiled faintly and was about to answer. The usually silent Lan Zhao beat her to it. He is my master, Lord Zhen Jin. He is Lady ZD's fiancé, the only successor of the Hundred Needles clan, a true holy knight, and the future lord of White Sand City. He is my savior, and, at the same time, your savior. ZD nodded. I hired you to escort me to White Sand City in the Wilderness Continent, and Lord Zhen Jin has always been hiding by my side. The goal was to hide from others and prevent competitors from maliciously obstructing our journey. The shipwreck happened, and I found Lord Zhen Jin. Believe me, Lord Zhen Jin will definitely lead us to leave this island alive. So that's how it is. Heiwan's Adam's apple bobbed as he quickly accepted this reality. Zhen Jin had a sword in one hand and a few darts in the other. When the bat monkeys came, he would throw the darts. When the bat monkeys came close, he would use the rapier to reap their lives. He looked like a human, but the arms under his clothes had already transformed into bare arms. His powerful strength and his innate talent made the darts and rapier become the scythe of the Grim Reaper. The people in the wooden hut were under attack and were in an abyss of suffering. But gradually, they felt the attacks on them lessen. Originally, the entire camp was filled with the unpleasant screams of the bat monkeys. But now, the camp was becoming quiet at a strange speed. What's going on? Mu Ban was half lying down, his back leaning against the wooden hut's wall. His chest was covered in blood. Suddenly, he felt someone walk over and looked over. At this moment, the smoke and dust slowly dissipated. Mu Ban saw a young man. He had a head of golden hair, a handsome face, and a noble and elegant posture. He held a sword in one hand and a dart in the other, leisurely and unhurriedly strolling over. The bat monkeys around him were flying in the air or on the ground beside him. They raised their heads and growled, baring their teeth and full of malice. But the golden-haired young man walked leisurely, as if this battlefield was a beautiful garden with a beautiful scenery. A bat monkey became impatient and suddenly jumped out, running on the ground like a wild dog. Whoosh! A dart shot out like lightning, piercing through the bat monkey. The bat monkey died immediately, but because of its great inertia, its corpse rubbed against the ground and moved a long distance, leaving a bright red trail of blood. Zhen Jin lightly stepped over the trail of blood and came in front of Mu Ban. Mu Ban raised his head and stared blankly at the young man. Although the young man's clothes were simple and tattered, Mu Ban swore that at this moment, he felt as if he was looking at a noble knight in platinum armor, riding a white horse, and a flag fluttering behind him. Chapter 88. Still alive? Jinjin asked indifferently. Muban nodded. Lend it to me. Jinjin looked at the crossbow in Muban's hand. Muban's mind went blank, but his body subconsciously moved. He raised his hands and offered the crossbow. Jinjin grabbed the crossbow's wooden handle trigger with one hand, while his other hand still held the sword. When Muban saw this, he wanted to say, "This position is wrong. You should grab the bottom of the crossbow with one hand to stabilize it." The other hand pulled the trigger. The next moment, another bat monkey pounced at him. Jinjin's hand shook slightly, and the crossbow trembled. A short arrow flew out. Poochie, the bat monkey that pounced at him, died. Jinjin's wrist moved, and with a light click, the crossbow was loaded. The bat monkeys screamed again. One of them was quite cunning and attacked Jinjin from behind. Jinjin did not turn his head. He only turned the crossbow around, and with a shake of his arm, the arrow flew out. The arrow pierced the bat monkey's mouth, and the arrowhead pierced through its spine, coming out from behind the bat monkey. The bat monkey knelt on the ground. Following its inertia, it rubbed against the ground and came to Jinjin's feet. Then, because its body stopped moving, its head, which was originally leaning backwards, fell forward to its chest. It looked like it was using its life to atone for Jinjin's sins. Offending a superior, offending a noble knight, was an unforgivable crime. Who is this person? What kind of archery skill is this? Am I dreaming? The surrounding people were saved, and they stared at Jinjin with their mouths wide open. Jinjin attracted the attention of all the bat monkeys, but every time they attacked, they would fall on their way to charge. Jinjin stood in the same place, and the number of bat monkey corpses around him increased. The way he controlled the crossbow was very irregular, and he was very free and undisciplined. However, each arrow seemed to have grown eyes as they drilled into the bat monkey's fatal weakness. Even if a bat monkey got close to Jinjin, the thin sword in Jinjin's hand would definitely light up with a silvery white sword flower, mercilessly reaping the fiery lives of the bat monkeys one by one. Seeing the bat monkeys suffer heavy losses, the black steel bat monkeys in the air could no longer hold themselves back. It uttered a series of short shrieks. Upon receiving its order, the bat monkeys dispersed. Trying to run? Jinjin raised his eyebrows slightly. With a flick of his wrist, an arrow flew towards the black steel bat monkey. The black steel bat monkey flapped its wings and dodged the arrow. Then it took a deep breath, and its chest puffed out in an exaggerated arc. In the next moment, it opened its mouth and screamed. Its voice was extremely sharp, and it actually stirred up waves of translucent sound waves that were visible to the naked eye in the air. The sound waves grew louder and louder, enveloping the entire wooden house. Everyone had a pained expression. They bent their backs and desperately blocked their ears, wanting to isolate themselves from the sound waves, but it was to no avail. Jinjin frowned. He had an extraordinary physique, but under the attack of the sound waves, he immediately felt a strong sense of nausea and wanted to vomit. After a few breaths, he felt a little dizzy. If this continued, his eardrums would definitely be damaged. The crossbows shot continuously, but the short arrows were either dodged or caught by the black steel bat monkey. The black steel bat monkey, regardless of whether it was its agility or the toughness of its body, was much stronger than the bronze-rank bat monkeys. But at this moment, Jinjin suddenly threw a dart. The dart followed the previous wave of arrows and hit the black steel bat monkey's left eye. The black steel bat monkey was heavily injured, and its shrieks came to an abrupt end. It had a dart in its left eye, and fresh blood flowed out, but did not choose to retaliate. Instead, it immediately turned around and flew away. The rest of the bat monkeys turned around to lead the way and did not dare to stay any longer. They all fled into the forest in a panic. Very quickly, the ruined camp regained its peace. Half an hour later, a few warriors were scattered around the camp, maintaining surveillance. Some people began to repair the fences and arrow towers outside the camp, and some people propped up pillars to temporarily strengthen the wooden houses. Their gazes would occasionally look at the empty space in the camp, and the people who were close to each other were still discussing in low voices. In the discussion, the words important person, powerful warrior, knight, and noble appeared frequently. A few seriously injured people were lying side by side on the ground. Some were looking at the sky, while others were already unconscious. ZD examined their injuries and thought about how to concoct medicine to treat them. "Doctor, I don't want to die. Please save me," a wounded person weakly begged. ZD smiled. "I am not a doctor. I am a pharmacist. Don't worry. Your injuries are not fatal. Although your injuries are not light, you stop the bleeding in time, and your methods of treating your wounds are also very mature. You'll be fine." Although she was comforting him, ZD knew in her heart, to treat injuries, one needed to rest, and during this period of rest, it was hard to say what would happen. This was not a safe place. In the process of rest, these seriously injured people could only be taken care of. Not only would they be unable to produce, but they would also consume a lot of resources. These people would be a heavy burden on the team. Sir President? Is it you? Is it really you? A voice came, interrupting ZD's thoughts. ZD turned her gaze and saw a big fat man who was so excited that he was about to cry. "Fatty, are you awake?" ZD greeted him with a smile. Hearing this call, the fat man suddenly knelt on the ground, covered his face with his fat right hand, and raised his head to cry. "Oh, it's great, Sir President. Sir President, you are not dead. You are still alive." Tears flowed down from his round cheeks, converging into two broad tear stains. Okay, get up quickly." ZD had to go forward and pat the fat man on the shoulder. "Come with me to pay respects to Sir Needle Tip." "Sir, Jinjin? Sir's fiancé." The fat man took his hand away, looking puzzled. ZD explained, "Please don't blame me, Fatty. I hid some things from you. This time, going to White Sand City was not just to prepare for the 100 Needles clan. My real intention was to cover up my tracks and escort Lord Jinjin to White Sand City in advance. The people that the 100 Needles clan arranged for Lord Jinjin met with misfortune on the way. I discussed with Lord Jinjin and felt that this was a malicious obstruction by our competitors. The City Lord election has a time limit. Not arriving at the city within the time limit will cause Lord Jinjin to lose a lot of points. In order to not let the competitors succeed, Lord Jinjin used me as a cover, changed his name, followed me, and boarded the Pig's Kiss. So it's like this." Fatty suddenly realized. In the open space in the center of the camp, Jinjin sat on a wooden stool. Behind him stood Lanzeo, holding his blade. Jinjin looked at the crossbow in his hand. This was the crossbow he had used in the previous battle. It was different from a normal crossbow. There was a rectangular arrow box on the crossbow. There was a black number 8 on the box. The box could store many short arrows. The trigger of the crossbow was a wooden handle that extended from the back of the crossbow. By constantly lifting and pressing the wooden handle, one could complete the action of loading and firing the arrow. "You designed this?" Jinjin looked away from the crossbow and looked at the opposite side. In front of him was a middle-aged man with a sallow face. There was an injury on his chest, but it had already been bandaged. It was Mu Ban. Mu Ban immediately said, reporting to Lord Jinjin, "This is the crossbow I designed. What does the number 8 mean?" Jinjin pointed at the arrow box. "Your number 8 work?" Mu Ban shook his head. "That's not it. The wood used to make the crossbow was found in this camp. The material is of high quality. It originally had the number 8 on it." After a pause, the wooden board took the initiative to explain, "It's not just this type of crossbow. I can also make other normal crossbows. It's just that I lack a metal crossbow mechanism, so I can't mass produce it." Jinjin nodded. The most delicate part of a crossbow was the mechanism. Normally speaking, this part of the crossbow was made of metal. Although the crossbow in Jinjin's hands had a special trigger, the mechanism was also made of metal. Jinjin had used this type of crossbow just now. Compared to a normal crossbow, the crossbow had a shorter range and less power. When dealing with the black steel bat monkeys, Zhang Jin's wooden darts were effective, but the arrows shot from the crossbow were either dodged or blocked by the black steel bat monkeys. The normal crossbow's firing speed had always been criticized. The crossbow solved this problem, and its firing speed became its biggest advantage. To be able to design such a special crossbow, Mu Ban was undoubtedly a genius. "So, you're a crossbow craftsman?" Jin Jin asked. "Yes, sir. This lowly one, Mu Ban, wants to go to the wilderness continent because I want to show off my skills." "Sir, you are my savior. This lowly one is especially willing to work for you." Mu Ban immediately replied, his attitude very enthusiastic. Zhang Jin's identity had already spread throughout the camp. The only successor of the 100 Needles clan, a member of the Temple Knights, and a candidate for the position of White Sand City's lord. No matter which one of these identities it was enough for Mu Ban to take the initiative to seek refuge with him. This was an important person that he could not normally come into contact with. "Very good. Then do well. I look forward to your performance." Jin Jin encouraged Mu Ban while secretly calculating. With a crossbow craftsman, he could mass-produce crossbows. Previously, he had such a thought, but due to the situation at that time and the fact that he could not make metal crossbows, now it was different. He had experienced craftsmen, and he could mass-produce metal crossbows. When ZD was in the oasis, she had collected a large amount of lizard acid. With these materials, he could concoct medicine. As long as he could create molds, he could mass-produce metal crossbows. A crossbow's power is much greater than a short bow, and its range is longer. Even better, a crossbow is suitable for beginners, and a bow requires training. A crossbow requires less training than a short bow and a long bow. The drawback is that the crossbow's firing speed is very low, but as long as you make some crossbows, you can make up for it. The only concern is ZD's reminder. If everyone has a crossbow, it will be a hidden threat to the other members of the team. But Zhang Jin thought about himself and his experiences on this island these days. "I can mutate now. My strength has greatly increased, and I can deal with stronger threats. Lan Zhao, Baiya, and the others are my most loyal subordinates. Even Plank, Hei Wan, and the others have been saved by me. My control over this team is much deeper than before. Most importantly, this island is too dangerous. It will not be easy to leave this place alive. I don't want these people to die because they don't have suitable weapons when they are attacked by the beast horde again. At that time, even if we have a boat, we won't be able to sail it." Thinking of this, Jin Jun made a decision. Although there were hidden dangers and risks in mass production of crossbows, but in order to deal with external dangers and maximize their chances of escaping, this risk should be taken. "Sir, this is Fat Tongue, one of the founding members of the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce. This time, we're going to White Sand City, and he'll be my assistant." ZD walked over with the fat man. Fat Tongue greets, "Sir." Senior Fatty quickly bowed to Jin Jin with a face full of smiles. He naturally had a good impression of Jin Jin. This was because the alliance between the 100 Needles family and the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce was well known. Although Senior Fatty had not seen Jin Jin with his own eyes, as one of the higher-ups of the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce, he had already read the relevant information and seen Zhang Jin's portrait. Zhang Jin nodded slightly. "Tell me, why are you here? I just heard that you were forced to leave. Did someone start a rebellion?" Fatty nodded his head, his face sunk. My lord, it's like this." "Stop." Zhang Jin raised his hand to stop him. He thought Fat Tongue was nervous, but when he heard the second sentence, he understood that Fat Tongue was stuttering. Zhang Jin looked at Mu Ban. "You tell him." Chapter 89. The voyage was originally going smoothly, but the ship's disaster suddenly happened. The Pig's Kiss broke into two halves, but fortunately, we were close to the island, so most of us escaped to the shore. We found that the captain was missing, and the first mate was in charge of the situation. Mu Ban explained in detail. What he said was not much different from what Jinjin had heard from Huang Zhao and Song Su. The survivors gathered on the beach, all wanting to leave this place. No one wanted to spend the rest of their lives on an island. The main problem in front of everyone was food. Therefore, the first mates sent Lan Zhao, Huang Zhao, and the rest of the first exploration team, with the goal of exploring and collecting food resources, preferably a stable water source, a source of meat, etc. Song Su volunteered to join the exploration team. However, this exploration team that carried everyone's hopes mysteriously disappeared. The people who stayed on the beach were even more afraid of this mysterious and dangerous island, and their desire to escape from this place was even more urgent. The ship broke into two halves, and everyone knew that to leave this island, they had to build a new ship. There was no lack of trees, and the desert was surrounded by dense rainforests. However, cutting trees, processing wood, and building ships were all jobs with a lot of labor. The more tired people were, the more energy they used, and the more food they consumed. From the wreckage of the ship, and from the wooden barrels floating on the sea, they did their best to search for every resource they could use to survive. Even human corpses were not spared. However, without a stable source of food from the outside world, even if the food reserves were considerable, they could not withstand the continuous consumption day and night. As time passed, the days of the main group became more and more difficult. The first mate had no choice but to implement a food control, which made everyone unhappy. The lack of food, the hopelessness of escaping, and the heavy work every day caused people to complain. Their emotions were impetuous, and it was difficult for them to calm down. A ship that could cross the continent and resist the attacks of the mere people in the sea naturally had good fighting power. The crew members were united and listened to the first mate's orders. Therefore, although the internal conflicts were growing day by day, the first mate still managed to stabilize the situation. Seeing that the food reserves had fallen to the warning line, the first mate had no choice but to form a second exploration team. Someone stepped forward, thinking of the big picture, and took the initiative to join the second exploration team. However, even more people did not want to face the dangers of the jungle alone. If he stayed in the army, wouldn't he still have food to eat every day? The chief mate understood that this could not go on. Most of them were reluctant, and he had to announce the drawing of lots. The result of the drawing of lots caused an uproar. Because very few crew members were chosen, most of them were passengers. This made people very suspicious that the chief mate had secretly manipulated the drawing of lots and was deliberately biased. A new drawing of lots was demanded. The first mate's attitude was very hesitant. Of course, the crew didn't want to explore the dangerous rainforest. The crew members supported the first officer the most, while the passengers on the other side stood on the opposite side of the crew members. In this situation of intensifying internal strife, a sudden incident ignited the entire stalemate. That day, I was so tired that I almost fell asleep as soon as I laid on the beach. Late at night, the people around me and I suddenly heard a woman scream. At first, we thought that a bird had been killed in the jungle. But soon after, the first mate's movements became louder and louder. Men's angry roars, curses, and the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. Just as I got up from the straw bed, a sailor with a panicked face told us to take our weapons and go support the first mate. The sailor told me that a group of passengers had suddenly attacked the first mate's tent with bad intentions. Although I wasn't a crew member because of my job, I had always been with the shipwright Lao Si. Our sleeping quarters were also next to each other. Lao Si and the others naturally stood on the first mate's side. They all picked up their swords and rushed to the tent. I also took a crossbow and followed him. While I got near the tent, I found that there was already a fierce battle there. The attacking passengers had surrounded the first mate's tent. We wanted to rush in from the outside, but we failed twice in a row. Fortunately, during the third time, Lao Si called his silly son over. We all called him Luobao. He was an abandoned baby adopted by Lao Si. He was a hybrid between a giant and a human. He was 3 meters tall and had great strength. He could directly pull a tree out. Luobao listened to Lao Si and used his tree trunk to sweep the passengers. The passengers were unable to resist and were utterly defeated. Just when we thought we were going to succeed, Zhong-gu stood out. He was a half-beast man and the leader of the rebels. He was wearing a thick steel armor, which allowed him to withstand Blockhead's tree sweep. Then, he stepped on a tree trunk and ran all the way. He jumped onto Luo Bao's body and used his fist to knock Luo Bao to the ground. Luo Bao fought back randomly, but it was all resolved by Zhong-gu. In the end, Luo Bao was beaten to the point where he held his head and begged for mercy. Zhong-gu defeated Luo Bao, which meant that he defeated us. He tied the first mate up and gathered everyone to explain the whole story. According to him, the first mate secretly hid food and enjoyed it himself. That night, he also had his eyes on a female passenger. He ordered people to use drugs to bring the female passenger into the tent. However, Zhong-gu and the others accidentally discovered her, which led to the fierce battle. We followed Zhong-gu into the first mate's tent and found a lot of food that was not in the storage. The female passenger called K-Fan woke up, which also confirmed Zhong-ji's words. After I understood the truth, I decided to stand on Zhong-ji's side. Most people chose the same way as me. Even the crew members were wavering. With solid evidence, the first mate could only admit to his crimes. Zhong-gu ignored the crew members' objections and forced the first mate to death. He relied on his own strength to become the leader of the camp. Zhenjin heard this and nodded. So, although this Zhong-gu was a half-beast man, his actions were heroic. What is his relationship with K-Fan? Mu Ban shook his head. The two of them did not know each other. Like you, at first, I thought that since Zhong-gu could stand up for a stranger and stand up for injustice, he would be a more qualified and outstanding leader. But then, something strange happened. We were attacked. Almost every night, there were people dying tragically. We examined the bodies, and the fatal injuries seemed to be caused by wild beasts. But the whole area around the camp had been cleaned up many times. The camp was on the beach, and the surroundings were almost unobstructed. Where did the wild beasts come from? Zhong-gu personally led the team to keep watch at night. At first, no one died. But soon, someone was ambushed during the day and lost his life. In the end, Zhong-gu is not made of iron. He has to keep watch day and night without rest. The guards formed by the others could not stop the killing from continuing. We were all very afraid. Everyone in the camp was in a state of panic. Rumors spread. One of them pointed at Zhong-gu and said that the real murderer was actually Zhong-gu. He was a half-beastman, and his animal nature was hard to tame. He liked to eat human flesh. If he did not eat human flesh, he would go crazy. Once he went crazy, he would eat human flesh. The mysterious deaths in the camp seemed to be caused by wild beasts, but they were actually caused by Zhong-gu. Because he was a half-beastman, I was like most people. At first, I did not believe this rumor. Until one day, someone saw a floating corpse on the sea. There was a shortage of food. The person who found the floating corpse was very surprised because he could vaguely see the floating corpse floating over. He had complete clothes on him, so there might be food or other resources. The person who found the floating corpse risked his life and swam a long distance before he finally came into contact with the floating corpse and dragged it ashore. The floating corpse's identity was the captain. There were wounds on his body, penetrating wounds. It was obvious that they were caused by a spear or similar weapon. The captain was assassinated, so it was very likely that the accident was also a man-made conspiracy. The discovery of the captain's corpse caused a sensation. Third mate Shisuo was the captain's son. He laid on the captain's corpse and cried loudly. He swore in front of everyone that he would find the captain's murderer and avenge his father. We were also very angry. We all speculated who the real murderer was. Why did they kill the captain? And why did they cause the accident? Based on the fatal wounds on the captain's corpse, we speculated who had a spear or similar weapon. No one was more suspicious than Zhong-gu, because not only did he have a strong and thick steel armor, but the most eye-catching thing was the pair of short spears hanging behind him. Even when he fought against Blockhead, he did not use this pair of short spears. Without a doubt, when he held the short spears, his combat power must be very impressive. The captain was black iron level, so was Zonga. The crew united around she saw, but everyone knew how strong Zonga was. The attacks were still happening, and they were getting more and more frequent. There were people dying almost every day. In terms of food, although the first mate's secret stash was stuffed into the public storage, it could not last long. But he couldn't bear the consumption, so Zonga had no choice but to try to form an exploration team. This time, many crew members volunteered to join, and the exploration team was quickly formed. On the day of the exploration team's departure, shipwright number 4 secretly came to me. He told me that it was all Shisua's plan. Shisua knew that he could not fight Zongu directly for the time being, so he wanted to leave with the crew and build his own ship. I knew that shipwright number 4 was the best at building ships, so after thinking about it, I decided to join them. Not long after the exploration team left, Zongu discovered that Shisua, Heiwan, and I were missing. He knew that he had been tricked, so he immediately led the team to give chase. We ran all the way, and just as we were about to be caught, the world suddenly changed. The surroundings were no longer a rainforest, but a forest. We were sent here by a mysterious force, and then we found this camp. This camp was very strange. The wooden houses were built directly on the ground, without any foundation, as if they were pulled out from the ground by a giant. Shisuo was very happy, thinking that this was a miracle. God helped us escape from the cruel and sinister enemy, and even gave us a temporary camp. We repaired the camp and set up camp here. Because the shipwright and I were very happy, the wood in the forest was more suitable for building new ships. After this, we split into 2 teams. Shiso, number 4, and his foolish son went out to cut wood. We continued to build the camp. But we did not expect to be attacked by the bat monkeys. Luckily, you saved us. The appearance of a hero is like this. This must be the arrangement of God. Under your lead, we will leave this demon's land. At this point, Muban's tone became fanatical. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.